Right, welcome back, everybody. Make sure I am unmuted. I am. Good to see everybody again. It is 1 o'clock, and we will start up the Colorado Oil and Gas Commission Day 1 on 800 series rules at this point. And Ms. Larson, I believe we are at the agenda point of public comment. And I believe you indicated we had one person sign up for public comment.
That is correct. Ms. Kimberly Wagner has signed up for public comment. However, I do not see her in our Zoom meeting. Ms. Wagner, if you are present and could raise your hand, that would help us locate you. Mr. Chair, I'm not seeing anyone raise their hand.
Okay, do we want to just move then into the initiation of starting party presentations, and then if Ms. Wagner shows up, we can take a break and come back to the one person that wanted to do public comment?
We can certainly do that.
All right, then I think I've got 350 Colorado and the Lookout Alliance is first, is that right?
That is correct. So we will get those presenters into the meeting.
Hello, can you all hear me? Great.
Yes, we can hear you.
And Katie Orton should be, her screen should be shared.
I think we're in the process of getting Ms. Orton on board.
Yes, she should be. Let's see, double check. She is in, Ms. Orton is in, and as a panelist, she does have the authority to share her screen.
Okay, great. Do you want to start sharing, Katie?
Yep, give me a second.
Great.
All right, can you see everything?
Yes, we can now see Ms. Orton's screen.
Perfect. Okay. Great. Well, we'll get started. Hello, good afternoon, commissioners. Next slide. My name is Michaela Steiner, and I'm the Oil and Gas Campaign Coordinator with 350 Colorado. Next slide. I'm not seeing the slides update, but I'm hoping that it does. In any case, today I'm presenting on behalf of 350 Colorado and the Lookout Alliance.
Michaela, why don't we wait? I'd like your slides to move along with you.
Okay.
Let's see if we can get Ms. Orton to figure out slide movement here.
Yeah, actually showing mine.
Okay.
So I don't know if there's that.
Yes, it just went to the second slide.
Can you see the slide?
Yes, and then it should be on
Okay,
the slide on the overview.
Can the overview?
Mm-hmm. Great. Okay, I'm just going to keep going with it. So we have 3 main concerns regarding the proposed rules in the 800 series. We're particularly concerned that the proposed rules fail to protect aquifers from threats of contamination. We also do not think that the proposed rules address the risk of induced seismicity and other geologic hazards posed by the creation of a UIC well. And lastly, we think that containing several different distances pertaining to governing issues may result in confusion, decreased health and safety protections, and decrease consistency in the process. Next slide. So the first point we're going to touch on today is about protecting aquifers. And groundwater is extremely important to protect, and we don't think that Rule 802 should exempt aquifers for this reason. Aquifers that today may be deemed as impossible for future sources of drinking water may not be deemed so in the future. Aquifers are unique in being a renewable source of water that has the ability to recharge or replenish. And furthermore, groundwater provides key ecosystem services of societal and economic value. And so as an environmental organization, this is a definite concern for us around the adverse environmental impacts on air, water, soil, biological resources, even if it's deemed to not be a source of drinking water used for agricultural purposes. And apart from these important ecosystem services, as of this morning, according to the US Drought Portal, 99% of the state's population is in drought. And Colorado is in the midst of a multi-decade shift toward aridification, largely caused by climate change. And so in the midst of this statewide drought and increasing aridification, hydraulic fracturing does not help slow the shift towards this aridification. As you may know, it's a pretty water-intensive form of oil and gas extraction, and it appears to be becoming more water-intensive over time. A study from Duke University found that from 2011 to 2016 alone, the water use per well increased 770%, and generally 2 to 8 million gallons of water may be used to frack a well. And this trend in water use for hydraulic fracturing combined with the increasing aridification and statewide drought, I think really brings home the need for aquifers to be protected. They're really a water savings account. And aquifers are unique in being a renewable source of water. About 98% of all available fresh water comes from aquifers underground, and many public water systems draw all or part of their supply from groundwater. So protecting them is imperative. Next slide, and I don't know what's going on with the slideshow, but happy to email it. But just a quick note on addressing the risk of induced seismicity. We really want to see this commission address the risk of induced seismicity. And the state's first induced seismicity work group that we talked about in our pre-hearing statement in one of their primers on risk management and mitigation really recommended that because of the increasing occurrence and detection of seismic events linked to the underground injection, that public entities should be involved in responding to these events and then providing the public with the adequate information regarding the application, the siting, any additional details related to a notice of an application. And that it's really important for the public to be aware and for the local government designee to be able to develop a communication and response strategy as early as possible and communicate that notice of application to the public before it's necessary to respond to an incident. So we would really like the public to be able to be notified of this. The last slide is just going into our recommendations, which I'm happy to share with you. You'll also have the PowerPoint. But yeah, just in conclusion, we're really recommending that the commission not exempt aquifers in Rule 802. That's our big thing. And regarding Rule 03, we'd really recommend requiring a notice of application for a UIC well to be provided to the local government designee, and furthermore that it be made available to the public, such as through posting on the COGCC website, along with the application materials. And lastly, we encourage the commission to standardize distances in Rule 803 to a mile in order to reduce confusion and just protect, improve and protect the health and safety and provide consistency in the process. We do think that the geologic radius of 12 miles for evaluating potential seismic risk should remain the same. Thank you.
Thank you for that presentation. And if you could make sure that that your slides are emailed to Ms. Larson so that we will have access to them, that would be great.
Yeah.
At this time, commissioners, do we have questions for this panel? Commissioner McGowan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thanks for coming today and your comments. I think this might be a question for staff. So to your request to not have exemptions for aquifers, I think this is a federal regulation, and even if the state said that we weren't going to give the exemptions, then I think that would fall upon EPA and they might give the exemptions. So I'm wondering if staff could clarify that for me.
AG Minor, Director Murphy.
Mr. Chair, I can begin and Director Murphy can supplement potentially, but Commissioner McGowan, you are correct. There are federal regulations governing aquifer exemptions as part of the Safe Drinking Water Act regulations that EPA has promulgated.
Thank you, AG Minor. Other questions? Okay, great. Thank you again for appearing before us and being a party to this important rulemaking. We look forward to receiving your slides and we thank you for your participation this afternoon.
Thank you.
Here's Officer Larson. My agenda has battlement concerned citizens et al. Next for a 15-minute presentation.
That is correct, Mr. Chair. We do also have Ms. Wagner, who it was to provide public comment in the meeting. If you'd like, we can certainly turn to her and then proceed with battlement concerned citizens.
Yep. Let's do the public comment portion of this rulemaking, and we invite Ms. Wagner to the Zoom panel. Hello.
Hi. Good afternoon, commissioners. I have some concerns about the final proposed draft rules. First and most important, I believe that all of our potential water sources must be protected from contamination by all underground injection. The UIC aquifer exemptions provided in Rule 802, 82.2b, and 82.3b, in which a source is so contaminated that it would be economically or technologically impractical to render the water fit for human consumption in 2b or agricultural use in 3b, I ask that those portions of that exemption be removed. An aquifer that may be technically or economically infeasible for those purposes at this time does not in any way mean that it's going to remain so. The COGCC should exercise the precaution principle and remove those exemption criteria to protect future water sources. Remember, removing oil and gas by the use of fracking methods was economically and technologically impractical not so long ago. And it's not infeasible that the removal, that making these water sources potable is may become feasible. A 2020 peer-reviewed study in the magazine Science or the journal Science shows that Western states, including Colorado, are moving towards mega drought conditions. And yesterday, according to the United States Drought Monitor, every single county in Colorado remains in a state of drought, with greater than 50% of our state in extreme or worse drought conditions. We must conserve every single potential water source at this time. Second, I believe that the application for the underground injection, any underground injection wells should not only be provided to the holders of the water rights, but also notice and provision of the application should be available to any interested party through either posting on the COGCC's website or by allowing interested parties to opt into something like an email system. Last, in Rule 803, I believe that distances should be standardized to 1 mile to reduce confusion, improve health and safety, and provide consistency throughout the rules. Also, because of the risk of induced seismicity in underground injection sites, the 12-mile potential seismicity evaluation zone should remain the same. But in addition, the COGCC should adopt a seismic monitoring system for all injection wells, not just commercial disposal wells, and all data should not just be available to the director, but also to the public. I thank you for your consideration today.
Thank you for appearing with us and presenting your thoughts and commentary. Are there any questions from commissioners for our one public participant? Very good. We took good notes. We appreciate your thoughts and perspective. It'll be part of the record, and we appreciate your appearing before us.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Now that we have undertaken public comment as part of the 800 series, we will now get back to our regularly scheduled programming, and that is the Battlement Concerned Citizens multi-pronged group. So we'll get those folks on the screen.
Just want to make sure that we have. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Let's make sure we've got all of your panelists, Mr. Sura. I see Ms. Sheehan, Ms. Lyle.
That'll do it.
That'll do it.
Thank you.
And we see your screen, so you're up.
Excellent. Good afternoon, commissioners. Matt Sura here representing Battlement Concerned Citizens organizations as well as the citizen groups. Today, we have a very short amount of time to discuss a number of issues within the 800 series. A primary concern is that the statement of basis and purpose states that a Form 2A will not be required if an oil and gas well is converted to a waste injection well. We believe that could put public health, safety, and welfare at risk and contradicts Rule 304 that requires a new Form 2A if a significant change occurs on the well site. Our other comments today will come from expert witnesses who will be discussing induced seismicity, including justification for seismic monitoring, cumulative effects of injection wells within 12 miles, scientific justification for the 12-mile review of seismic activity and faults, definition of seismic monitoring, and suggested changes for the traffic light system policy. So now I would like to introduce two of the nation's leading experts on induced seismicity from the University of Colorado, Drs. Ann Sheehan and Abby Lyle.
Good afternoon. My name is Ann Sheehan. I'm a geophysicist with expertise in earthquakes and seismology. I'm first going to give a brief introduction to induced seismicity, followed by information in support of the proposed Series 800 rules related to induced seismicity. Induced earthquakes are earthquakes caused by human activities and can be caused by mining, filling reservoirs, injection of deep fluid or fluid deep underground, and hydraulic fracturing. Most of the recent induced earthquakes in Colorado, Oklahoma, and Kansas are related to fluid injection. The slide on the right shows earthquake damage due to a sequence of induced earthquakes in Denver in the 1960s. Colorado is actually well known for its induced earthquakes, as the first documented case of injection-induced seismicity was in Colorado due to the disposal of chemical waste fluid deep underground at the Rocky Mountain Arsenal, which is located just west of DIA. The fluid injection at the arsenal began in 1962, with earthquakes occurring shortly after and continuing into the 1980s, even though injection ceased in 1966. Induced earthquakes have been in the news a lot recently, largely due to the dramatic uptick in earthquake activity in Oklahoma over the past 10 years. This map shows regions of induced seismicity, including several in Colorado. In seismicity, it's a term that just means the distribution of earthquakes. In 2014, an earthquake occurred just east of Greeley, Colorado, in a region that was previously aseismic, which means without earthquakes. and it was felt as far away as Boulder and Golden. My research group deployed seismometers to record the aftershocks and shared the results with COGCC, industry, and the public. The earthquakes were centered on a high rate wastewater injection well, and after additional earthquakes occurred, the well was shut down temporarily. I'm now going to provide supporting evidence for the proposed Series 800 rules. I agree that seismic monitoring is warranted if the permitted wastewater injection rate exceeds 10,000 barrels per day. The work of Weingarten et al., shown on the right, found that an earthquake is statistically more likely to occur near wells injecting more than 300,000 barrels per month, which is 10,000 barrels per day, than near wells injecting at lower rates. Further studies are consistent with that result and are provided in my written testimony. It's important to recognize that multiple wells injecting into the same formation have a cumulative effect on increasing pore fluid pressure, and increasing pore fluid pressure is the main factor attributed to injection-induced seismicity. In 2016, a second well began injecting less than 1 mile from the well that caused the Greeley earthquakes in 2014, leading to an increase in seismicity, which is documented in Brown et al. And in Oklahoma, multiple injection wells, shown in the figure on the right as triangles, contributed to pressure increases attributed to triggering earthquakes. The earthquakes are shown as black dots. Seismicity evaluation within a 12-mile radius of proposed injection wells is warranted and supported by science. Induced earthquakes at distances greater than 12 miles, which is 20 kilometers, from the causative injection well or group of wells have been documented in Colorado, Oklahoma, and Kansas. The long-term operation of wells and subsequent far-field pressurization leads to effective stress changes that can induce earthquakes. Evaluating seismicity and faults within 12 miles of proposed wells will provide important information for evaluating the likelihood of earthquakes being induced. We know that injecting near faults should be avoided. An example of seismicity expanding a distance from the causative well as a function of time is given in this figure. The U.S. Bureau of Reclamation has operated a wastewater disposal well, injection well, in the Paradox Valley of Western Colorado since 1991. On the left is the seismicity shortly after injection started and is close to the well. However, on the right is present day seismicity, and after years of injection, the earthquakes have now migrated to a distance greater than 20 kilometers, the red circle of the injection well, which is a yellow star. Lastly, I recommend that seismic monitoring be clearly defined in the regulations. Seismic monitoring should be defined in terms of the ability to detect, locate, and determine depth and magnitude of earthquakes within some magnitude threshold and distance from a given well. A single low-quality seismic instrument near a well does not provide useful seismic monitoring, as multiple seismometers are needed to identify and locate earthquakes. The seismic monitoring data should be open and available in real time. A regional seismic network would be the most effective and efficient way to meet these criteria, as is done in Oklahoma and Texas. Accurate determination of earthquake location and magnitude is critical for risk mitigation traffic light systems, which Dr. Abby Lyle will now discuss. Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Abby Lyle, and I'm an engineer with expertise in earthquakes and their impacts on buildings and infrastructure. And I'm going to share some scientific insights into the design of an effective traffic light system. These systems are an important part of a comprehensive risk management strategy in cases of potential induced seismicity, along with the seismic monitoring and the other conditions already discussed. We do need a comprehensive earthquake risk mitigation strategy for injection-induced earthquakes in Colorado. We know that in the past, earthquakes have been produced by wastewater injection in Colorado. The data here are from the Rocky Mountain Arsenal earthquakes that occurred in the 1960s, and 3 of those earthquakes were bigger than magnitude 5. These moderate magnitude earthquakes can cause damage to property and safety concerns. These pictures are from southern Colorado in the earthquake in 2011, but we see many similar pictures, for example, from Oklahoma, of chimney damage, cracking in foundations, masonry wall, and other veneers, and other types of damage in housing. The traffic light system and its 3 regimes of operation, the green light, the amber light, and the red light, being proposed here can be a valuable strategy to mitigate risks from new and existing wells. Here are some key features that influence its effectiveness. First, there is a magnitude threshold associated with modifying operations, the amber light threshold. The modification to operations should be context dependent in terms of volume reduction or other strategies, but significant action is needed for the amber light to be meaningful. There is also a magnitude threshold associated with red light or suspension of operations. Finally, there is a distance threshold, which basically implicates which wells may be contributing to earthquakes and the needed operational changes. There is evidence that these systems can work. This plot is from some of our own work in which we show that having an amber light threshold that changes operations can reduce the total number of earthquakes. That's the y-axis. Here we show that for the case examined, significant decrease in the number of earthquakes over a 2-year period. This corresponds with a decrease in risk, meaning a decreased chance of damage to buildings and infrastructure. Turning now to the specifics of the policy, the 2.5-mile threshold is insufficient for 2 reasons. First, injection wells can cause or contribute to earthquakes much farther than 2.5 miles away. Professor Sheehan provided some evidence for that from empirical studies. Moreover, we don't know the locations of earthquakes very precisely, and therefore a limit of 12 miles would be more consistent and appropriate with the other COGCC policies. The magnitude thresholds of the COGCC policy are appropriate in that anything less than a magnitude 4.5 is not very likely to cause building and infrastructure damage. However, bigger earthquakes can occur after operations are suspended. It is also advisable to consider magnitude thresholds that depend on proximity to critical infrastructure, limiting magnitudes more aggressively where operations and the earthquakes could endanger property.
Thank you, Dr. Lyle. The changes we are proposing in light of this testimony are to Rule 803F. These proposed changes do the following. First, consider cumulative effects of injection amounts. 2, requiring that traffic light protocol will be required as a condition of approval rather than may be required. And 3, define some minimum requirements for seismic monitoring to ensure that it will be meaningful. The other change we are proposing is to the statement of basis and purpose that provides that operators need not submit a Form 2A to convert an oil and gas well into an injection well. We strongly oppose this language and encourage it to be stricken, and I am authorized to state that the City of Thornton supports our position. This is in direct conflict with Rule 304A3 that states a significant change to a well site requires a Form 2A. There are some reasons that it is a significant change. First, wells at the end of their productive use are expected by surface owners to be plugged and abandoned, not put to use for another 2 decades as injection facilities. Second, these facilities are known to be sources of not only VOCs, but also hazardous air pollutants. Last month, the Air Quality Control Commission went through an entire rulemaking in an effort to reduce emissions from waste injection facilities. Third, wells that could be subject to conversion exist within neighborhoods or just outside of municipalities, like this injection facility that was allowed within a few hundred feet of the city of Brighton. Fourth, there can be significant surface impacts. Water truck traffic can be continuous for these facilities. The operator of this facility estimated 150 to 200 trucks a day. Even if the truck traffic was 1/10 of that number, it would be inappropriate if the well was within a neighborhood. Finally, if conversion from a well to an injection facility requires the additional equipment such as tanks and pumps, it is a significant change and therefore should be considered through a Form 2A. The best solution may be to simply remove the language or to state that a Form 2A will be required unless the operator can demonstrate that the conversion is not considered a significant change pursuant to Rule 304A3. Thank you.
Does that conclude your presentation?
It does. Thank you.
All right, thank you. At this time, if we could stop the screen share, and it'll give us a bigger screen to ask questions. So I would ask commissioners if there are questions for this panel. I'm not seeing others with questions. Mr. Sir, could I ask you a question with regard to the contemplation of doing a well conversion under a 2A as opposed to the Form 2? What do you see as probably obvious, but C is the benefits of having a 2A process in place for that as opposed to a 2.
Thank you for the question. So a Form 2A process is really looking at surface impacts, where a Form 2 typically is limited to downhole issues. There's also a number of the requirements for assessment of potential for impacts would be included in a Form 2A, as we know from the 300 series that you just worked on over the last couple months. Including air quality impacts, traffic, impacts, all of those impacts would be considered, where I don't see a clear path to have those specific impacts considered in a Form 2.
Okay. Thank you for that additional clarification.
Thank you.
And thank you to your group for identifying these experts for us and for their testimony today. That was very helpful. If we could make sure the slides are forwarded to Hearings Officer Larson, we will have them readily available during deliberation.
Thanks.
All right. With that, we will move to the next page of our agenda, and it looks like Be the Change Colorado has a 5-minute presentation. Is that still accurate, Ms. Larson?
That is correct. And Mr. Doe, if you're with us, you have been promoted to a panelist, so you do have the ability to unmute yourself and start your video if you'd like.
Mr. Doe, we see you. Well, actually, we don't see you, but we see that you are there, and you are unmuted. So if you're talking, we're not hearing you, unfortunately.
Mr. Doe, if it's convenient for you too, you can also chat to us a phone number if you would like to call in on a phone and present your comments in that fashion.
Ms. Larson, he did just chat to us.
He did, and perhaps, Mr. Doe, I know it's sometimes you are unmuted on our end. Sometimes it is the laptop or the computer that you might be accessing that still has the microphone muted. I know I've run into that myself at times when I thought I've been unmuted, but I'm not.
Try turning the volume up on your computer. Are you using earbuds that are connected? Otherwise, I think last time we allowed you to call in so that we could hear you that way. If you wanted to chat us a phone number and then call in, and then Ms. Larson can identify that phone number and we can make sure we hear from you that way.
We'd be happy to do that. So Mr. Doe, if you want to go ahead and just chat me again with a phone number and then call in on that phone number, and the call-in information for this Zoom meeting is on the agenda and also on our website. So if you just call in on that phone number, we'll identify your phone number in the attendee list, and we could move forward with La Plata County and then bring Mr. Doe back.
That sounds like a good plan. Mr. Doe, we look forward to hearing from you once you're able to connect. Let's move to La Plata County and San Miguel County for a 10-minute presentation. Hello.
Good afternoon. We have a slight change. Lynn Paget will not be giving any oral testimony today, so it'll just be Cheryl Rogers, and I see her on, so I think we're ready to go. My name is Mikey Iatridis. I represent San Miguel County and La Plata County, and Ms. Cheryl Rogers, the La Plata County attorney, will be testifying on both counties' behalf.
Afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Cheryl Rogers, La Plata County Attorney. I want to address two topics in my testimony today. The first topic is the inconsistent language between Rule 801A and Rule 801B, which leaves those obtaining their drinking water from individual water wells or microsystems less protected or subject to a higher burden of proof than those who receive their drinking water from larger systems. And the second topic is that some rules in the 800 series should apply to existing facilities. Beginning with the discrepancies between Rule 801A and Rule 801B, we want to once again bring a more rural perspective and reality to your attention. This is a map of La Plata County and provides a good depiction of the commingling of various types of wells in our county. The red triangles are CBM wells. The blue triangles are some of the 8,900 water wells that exist in our county, and more specifically, those in the oil and gas patch. The orange squares are underground injection wells. Sorry, I'm having issues with my computer. Unfortunately, these individual well owners or consumers of water from microsystems do not benefit from the government's health protections for public water systems. They are responsible for assessing and treating their own water quality, even when that quality is impacted by oil and gas activities. This unequal protection is due to the definition in the rules of underground, sorry, it's overly sensitive, to the, in the definition rules an underground source of drinking water. The definition of underground source of drinking water relies on yet another term that is defined in the EPA under the Safe Drinking Water Act, and that term is public water system. A public water system is first and foremost a system, and that system must have 15 service connections or serve at least 25 people. We understand the need to keep the definition of public water system, and we acknowledge the latest staff revisions that improve the rule. So we revise our ask to amend Rule 801B to make it as protective as Rule 801A. Hundreds of thousands of Colorado citizens use individual wells instead of systems, or they receive their water from smaller microsystems outside of the scope of Rule 801A. Rule 801B attempts to protect these water users by applying Colorado's groundwater standards rather than the federal drinking water standards. However, there is a difference in the language in 801A and 801B that leaves the smaller systems or individual well users less protected and allows injection wells to meet a lower standard of proof for approval. 801A says an injection well may be denied if the well or its operation will result in the presence of a substance or matter in a larger system if it may cause a violation of drinking water standards. But if the same substance or matter is in a microsystem or individual well, one must demonstrate that it will cause a violation of the standards before denial is allowed. May cause is a lower threshold or burden, is a lower threshold or burden than will cause, and therefore users of water or larger systems are more protected. Rule 801A also provides an additional criterion that is missing from Rule 801B. If a large water system is involved, denial can occur if it may adversely affect the health of persons. However, this criterion is absent from Rule 801B, and therefore the injection well may not be denied simply if it may adversely affect the health of persons. We recommend that the language in Rule 801B be revised to match the protection afforded in 801A. Our second recommendation is that Rule 806 relating to timing of injection fluid sampling and analysis and Rule 807 relating to reporting sources of produced water should apply to existing facilities. These requirements do not require any new equipment or retrofitting and apply to ongoing operations. Therefore, they fall within the criteria set forth in the Statement of Basis and Purpose for applying new requirements to ongoing operations. We have provided suggested red lines in our pre-hearing statement, but we made some additional revisions in these PowerPoint slides. It is our position that existing facilities should submit the same sampling and analysis information as new wells and should report sources of produced water by a date certain after the effective date of the new rules. A requirement for sampling, analysis, and reporting from current facilities would aid the state in taking a step closer to better protecting those facilities permitted under the foster mission. That concludes our testimony.
Great. Thank you, Ms. Rogers, for that testimony. We have appreciated the Plata County and San Miguel County's participation. You've always brought very tailored suggestions, which is very helpful to a complex rulemaking, and I, for one, am appreciative. I'm looking to my commissioners who are nodding their heads up and down, so that means they agree too. So thank you for that and for your presentation. Do we have questions for this panel? Great. We will look to your slides to be delivered to Ms. Larson, since they contain more better and newer red lines than from your response that we had looked at. So we'll look at that and contemplate that over deliberations, and thank the counties again for their participation. Ms. Larson, any headway with Mr. Doe and Be the Change?
Yes, Mr. Doe believes his microphone has been resolved, so we can go ahead and bring him back in. And
Can you hear me?
We can hear you, Mr. Doe. Yay.
we can hear you.
Good. You don't need to see me, but these are some comments that are generated from the conversation I heard this morning from your experts, and they deal with water use and liquid disposal. The Polis administration has approved roughly 3,000 plus wells since it took office in January of 2019. Let's assume for the moment that all of these wells were actually drilled and all were horizontals. We know that horizontals need between 8 and 12 million gallons of fresh water per well to frack. Thus, we can posit that these wells appropriated around 24 billion gallons of public water. Water in this state is a public resource, owned by the people, not the state. The Constitution is specific on this point. The state water plan estimates that by 2050, the state will have a domestic water shortage of 500,000 acre feet. The water used for fracking those 3,000 wells approved by the Polis administration is in a little over a year, comes to about 75,000 acre feet. You know where we're going, because we've been saying it over and over again since Mr. Robbins first unveiled his 16th objective criteria, which we continue to maintain are actually a repeal of SB 181. We've written reams about it, and we've never received a reply or even a nod of recognition from the state. But the point here is that you have no idea of the impacts you are having with the unfettered use the frackers are having on the public's water supply and the environment until you start doing cumulative analysis on an industry-wide scale. We contend These are negative environmental impacts and that can't be mitigated. An alternative that would greatly diminish the negative impacts would be a requirement that the industry clean the liquid waste to CWA standards. With regard to disposal of the flowback liquid, which we don't refer to as water because it is mostly poison, that too needs to be analyzed on an annual and cumulative basis. For example, assume that half the fracking liquid comes back to the surface during flowback as waste to be disposed of. Thus, from the 3,000 wells approved by the Polis administration this past year, about 37,000 acre-feet of liquid waste has to be disposed of immediately. This waste will continue to come to the surface over the life of the well and have also to be disposed of. What is the public value of that water? Is the public well served by allowing its water to be destroyed for private benefit? And more importantly, what are we doing to our usable groundwater? I don't have time to go over the history of EPA's Class 2 well program and how it has been commandeered by the industry to socialize their operational costs with the collusion of the state. But most of our groundwater may be needed in the future that is predicted to be drier and hotter, largely as a result of fossil fuel use. So the questions now before us: how much groundwater are we contaminating? How much poison from the industry is being forced into these reservoirs annually? Will this groundwater ever be needed for public use? What will be the additional cost to clean this water for domestic use that can be reasonably attributed to the industry? All of these questions need to be answered with regard to water use and waste disposal, but are not entertained even momentarily in this rulemaking. That constitutes my comments. I hope you get the gist of what we've been saying from the get-go, that you have to do cumulative analysis or you can't understand the impacts of what you're recommending through rulemaking. And we can't seem to get there. I don't know what to say about this, except continue to repeat over and over again the same litany. You have to analyze what the impacts are upon the people and the environment because the law requires it. You don't know if you're protecting us because you haven't done the analysis. It's like the 2,000-foot setback. This may be the only time we agree with Ms. Granger, but there's no scientific basis for that 2,000-foot setback. In fact, if you really look at the ICF study on page 128, you'll find that the impacts go well beyond 2,000 feet. The way to get over this imbroglio, in our opinion, is to do an independent study, continuously monitoring a well pad to find out what's actually coming off those wells, and do dispersion modeling to see how far the reach of those poisons are. That's what you need to do. And it's required by the law. You have to protect the public and you have to protect the environment. And you can't do it if you don't know what you're doing. It's as simple as that. So I would certainly recommend that before you finalize your 2,000-foot setback requirement, and let me just add here that setback requirement would not protect the people that died at Firestone because the industry was out of there before the houses were built.
Mr. Doe, if you could wrap up, you are out of time.
Well, I'm just telling you, I'm expressing our frustration with what goes on here and what's been going on for a year and a half. But the setbacks have two parts to them. The industry can't come closer than the distance that protects the public, but then to allow them to come in, to allow the development industry come right in behind the industry, the oil industry, and build homes 250 feet away from the oil and gas.
Mr.
Doesn't protect anybody. Yeah.
Thank you
Okay.
very much.
Well, okay. You got the gist of it.
Yep, we got the gist of it. We appreciate your testimony and participation. Do we have any questions from commissioners for Mr. Doe? Seeing none, we thank you for your participation, and we will move to our next panel, which is Karis LLC, and I believe they have 8 minutes. Is that right?
That is correct.
my stuff off. Good
Hello.
afternoon. Sorry, we have some,
I think you're logged in twice.
yes, you're right. Okay, is that better?
Nope, you're still got some reverberation.
Okay. Sorry about that.
Yeah, Ms. Hill, I see that I see you in one screen where you're logged in, but I also see you're logged in again as H Hill. Perhaps if we could log that one out, then we would not get the reverberation.
There we go. Okay, sorry about that. Okay, good afternoon, Commissioners, Director Murphy, and COGCC staff. I am the Regulatory Manager for Caris Piance LLC, and I am testifying on their behalf. I will briefly address Caris's general concerns regarding the 800 rule series, and then hand my testimony over to my colleague, Michael Leibowitz, who will specifically address the geological characteristics of the Piance Basin. Caris requests to allocate any remaining time to our closing statements. Oops. That's the wrong one. Apologies again. To open, Caris was very encouraged to see the revision made to Rule 802 little b 2 and 3 for exempted UIC aquifers, which clarifies that a UIC aquifer will be exempted if a zone proposed for injection cannot and will not serve as a viable source for domestic or agricultural use, and the zone or formation contains hydrocarbons. Caris believes that this reflects an alignment of a common goal. To clarify the criteria further in Rule 802 little b 2 and 3, Caris recommends that the Commission adopts the EPA's additional criteria for preventing contamination of underground sources of drinking water found in 40 CFR 1464b2, which allows for an injection well that is situated at a depth or location that will make recovery of drinking water economically or technically impractical. Caris believes that this is a distinct component of criteria that needs to be considered for injection wells, especially regarding the unique geological stratigraphy of the Piance Basin. Now, Caris knows that the COGCC staff is well aware of our disposal operations, but we would like to take this opportunity to address the general public and explain why we're disposing of water into injection wells. First, it is important to note that Caris disposes of produced water into formations that contain natural hydrocarbons, so that injection zone would not be considered a viable source of water for domestic or agricultural use. Second, the zones in which Caris disposes of produced water are considered aquifer exemptions by the EPA. To further drill down into Caris's handling of produced water, it is important to note that Caris operates over 4,300 wells in the Piance Basin, which all generate varying volumes of produced water. During an active drilling and completion program, Caris recycles 95% of produced water, which is then utilized in future downhole operations. This significantly reduces the need to utilize fresh water. Caris operates 5 water recycling facilities where a majority of produced water is transported via pipeline and injected into the well. Caris currently operates 19 injection wells, which are situated throughout the basin. Based on 2020 modeling, the highest daily amount of water produced for disposal was 65,904 barrels in one day. Note that this produced water was disposed into injection wells across the basin, so not just one injection well. For 2020, Caris's average disposal rate is roughly 28,113 barrels a day. Injecting produced water for disposal into aquifer exempted wells is the preferred method of disposal, which has significant benefits to the environment. If we take, for instance, Caris's average disposal of 28,113 barrels a day, which would then be required to be hauled off for disposal via semi-trucks, This would mean that there would be approximately 197 trucks moving constantly every day throughout the basin. This would create an increase in fugitive dust and combustion emissions, not to mention potential roadside accidents. Now, residents have made it very clear in the Piceance Basin they do not support increased truck traffic. Therefore, the benefits of injecting produced water into disposal wells reduces impacts of the environment, which CARES believes needs to be seriously contemplated when weighing the benefits of produced water disposal. Now, I will hand the discussion over to Michael Leibowitz.
Turn. Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. Can I get a time check while I bring up my PowerPoint here?
Yes, you've used 4 minutes and 36 seconds, so you have 3 minutes and 24 seconds remaining.
Okay, thank you very much. I'll try to keep this brief. CARES operates primarily in Colorado in the Piceance Basin. This is located in northwest Colorado. As you can see from this stratigraphic chart on the right here from the USGS Johnson and Roberts 2000.
Mr. Leibowitz, let me stop your time because we can't see your screen.
Okay, give me one moment here. Oh, I kind of jumped the gun there. I apologize. Can you see the screen now?
Yes.
Okay, my apologies. Again, the Piceance Basin is located in the locator map on the left in northwest Colorado. This strat chart on the right shows the rocks present in the basin as well as the adjacent Uinta Basin. You can see from the key, the green circles and the open circles with the hash marks on the outside are oil and gas production symbols. And the green S's are where the USGS has mapped potential source rocks in the basin. And the first thing you should probably notice is there's an abundance of source rocks and production throughout the stratigraphic column of this entire basin. This is from Johnson and Rice, 1990, a article in the AAPG Bulletin showing both a cross-section of where production comes from as well as isotopic studies showing the source of that production as well. And again, just illustrating that there's a huge assortment of source rocks and reservoirs within this basin, which have hydrocarbon productive potential. In total, there are roughly 15,000 feet of hydrocarbon-prone section between the Paleocene, Eocene rocks at the surface and the Cenomanian rocks, 15,000 feet in the subsurface in places, a span of nearly 70 million years. The EPA has regulated UIC injection since 1982 and worked with the Aquifer exemption system in that time as well. And Colorado has worked within that system fairly successfully. We don't see a reason to deviate at all from the EPA injection system. I think it should be stated that aquifers are not exempted because it's decided that a commercial purpose is better suited to the reservoir. Aquifers are only exempted if it's determined that no future source of drinking water can be yielded from the rocks at the given time. Okay, finally, again, we showed you that there's an abundance of source rocks and production from this basin. Because of the principles of relative permeability, it's impossible to produce the water present in these rocks without the associated hydrocarbons. Yes, there are groundwaters in these rocks with 10,000 TDS or even slightly less in many places. However, because of the huge amount of hydrocarbons generated in this basin, much of the rock column has partial saturations of hydrocarbons. And those hydrocarbons cannot be excluded from the flow stream of a future water well. And it's for this reason that these rock bodies should not be regarded as aquifers. And we've argued before that it should be a classification of produced water or something, but it needs to be noted that these are not viable aquifers due to the presence of these hydrocarbons. My final slide is simply the request we made to the rule modification and matches our written testimony that's already been submitted.
Great, thank you very much. Looking at my fellow commissioners, are there questions for this panel? Commissioner McGowan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thanks for your testimony today. I was wondering if you could explain why you think within 10 miles is an appropriate marker for us to use if an aquifer is already exempt, that anything within 10 miles should also be exempt. Isn't that what your language said? Yes.
Yeah, can you, I'm sorry, can you repeat the question? I had a little feedback over here.
Yeah, so can you explain to me how you came up with if an aquifer is currently exempt, that anything within a 10-mile radius, that aquifer, a location there should also be exempt? How did you come up with 10 miles?
10 miles is a reasonable diameter or radius because these rocks generally are dipping 3 or 4 degrees and have the same characteristics 10 miles from one reference point to another. So if the rocks at that point are at the reference point are above 10,000 TDS or have received an aquifer exemption, it's a simple exhibit to show that 10 miles away, we're at similar depths and have similar temperatures and salinities. And that's why we felt 10-mile radius was appropriate.
Thank you for that testimony. Other questions from commissioners? All right, seeing none, we thank you for your participation and your being with us this afternoon. If you wanted to send that PowerPoint over to Ms. Larson, we'll have it in the record as we do deliberations, and that will be helpful. And with that, we will move to our next panel, which I believe is Citizens for a Healthy Community, for a 5-minute presentation. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. That's that time thing. Good to see you all. First of all, I just want to make sure that Chris Michalski is on. I don't think I see him. Ms. Larson, if you could confirm.
He's being added right now.
Great. Thank you so much. Okay, great. There he is. Then I'll go ahead and get started. Good afternoon again, Commissioners. Natasha Leger, Executive Director, Citizens for a Healthy Community. We want to thank staff for adopting the traffic light seismic monitoring system on UIC wells. This is critically important to erring on the side of caution and safety. We had recommended the traffic light system in the 400 series and staff committed to reviewing it in the 800 series. We appreciate this. We raised the traffic light system within the context of monitoring induced seismicity caused by hydraulic fracturing, not only wastewater injection wells. This was not addressed in staff's discussion this morning and would like to see the Commission extend this safety precaution to hydraulic fracturing as well. Chris Michalski will discuss the connection between induced seismicity and the triggering of other geologic hazards in his presentation. We also appreciate staff making notice more transparent and accessible via the website. However, we are concerned that this places the burden on the public and water rights holders to monitor the COGCC website. We understand that staff is sympathetic to the need for an email notification system, but that it would be difficult to implement. It is our understanding that the GIS analysis necessary to ensure that someone who opts in, for example, with an email address, a watershed, and zip code is basic GIS analysis, and encourage the Commission and staff to update any current GIS and data systems that may be limited or outdated. So with that, let me turn it over to Chris.
Thank you, Natasha, and hello, commissioners. My name is Chris Michalski, and I'm an attorney in Gunnison, and I serve as legal counsel for Citizens for a Healthy Community. First, I want to echo Natasha and thank staff for including TLS for underground injection wells. Regulating induced seismicity from underground injection is a giant step towards protecting public health and the environment. However, CHE urges staff to extend TLS to all oil and gas operations, including hydraulic fracturing. Most TLS regulations around the country and world are specifically designed for hydraulic fracturing induced seismicity. Further, Jane Stanzik affirmed that the COGCC has the institutional knowledge of the seismic effects of fracking and reiterated during the 300 series presentations that stimulation from hydraulic fracturing induces seismicity. So, given the known connection between induced seismicity and hydraulic fracturing, CHC proposes that the COGCC's TLS regulations extend beyond underground injection and cover all oil and gas operations, including fracking. Next, CHC wants to express its support for a 12-mile seismicity evaluation radius. As CHC expressed in its response statement, evidence exists to prove that underground injection can induce seismicity that can cause damage 15 miles away from the injection well. The clearest example is in 2011, when wastewater injection induced a 5.3 magnitude earthquake in the Raton Basin, which caused damage to buildings in Trinidad, Colorado, 15 miles away from the earthquake's epicenter. Thus, the minimum radius for a seismicity evaluation should be 12 miles. Further, certain parties such as API argue that Colorado must be able to point to another state with a 12-mile seismicity evaluation radius in order to adopt one of its own. As this commission knows, states need not base their own regulations on what another state is doing, and each state is allowed to have different regulations and laws. As such, that argument holds no merit. Additionally, CHC fully supports and urges the removal of the technical and economic feasibility criteria for UIC aquifer exemptions. As the commission and staff are aware, just because an aquifer might be technologically and economically impractical now does not mean it will continue to be so in the future. Under SB 181, the COGCC's regulations must be precautionary and protective of our water resource in the face of unknown damage. Finally, I want to discuss notice to water rights holders. During the 300 series testimony and discussions, the commission staff noted that water rights holders can get notice through the general email notification system and seemingly agreed upon extending the general email notification list for water rights holders. Commissioner Messner pointed out his own family's ditch in Gunnison, which draws water 5 miles away from where it irrigates, and noted that damage 5 miles away at the water source could damage his family's water right. However, staff did not extend the general email list and cited GIS difficulties as the reason for not being able to send notice to those in a watershed. CHC disagrees with that point, and the general email list can request data points for which basic GIS mapping can formulate who receives notice. It is also worth noting that in the draft statement of basis and purpose, a water right is classified as a, quote, legal authorization instead of a property right. That is a mischaracterization of the law, and CRS 3792-310 sub 2 Roman numeral 1 expressly states, quote, water rights are usufructuary property rights to use water, end quote. As such, CHC reiterates its point that the general email notification list should extend beyond the 500 series to the 800 series, as well as the 300 series, and should be able to provide notice to those in a certain geographic area, including but not limited to water rights holders. Thank you.
Thank you for that presentation. Commissioners, do we have questions for this panel? All right, I am not seeing any questions, so we thank you for your continued participation with us. And thank you for bringing these points to us, and we will look forward to contemplating the points you bring. With that, we will move to our next panel, which I believe is Fritzler Resources with a 5-minute presentation.
That is correct, Mr. Chair. And Mr. Fritzler is participating by phone. He's been unmuted, so he will be able to present via phone.
Mimi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, good, thank you. Chair and members of the Commission, I appreciate the opportunity to provide comment on the proposed 800 series rules. My name is Gene Fritzler and I'm Vice President of Fritzler Resources. We've been in business for over 35 years as operators in Colorado. Our family has been associated with this business for over 60 years. We lived in the Yenner camp in the late 50s and our father worked in the Adena field during the 60s and 70s. We currently operate about 50 wells in the state of Colorado, and our company has supported a number of small contractors and has provided over $2 million in county taxes throughout our history. The type of wells, injection wells that we operate and service are small injection wells, which are either enhanced recovery wells or help maintain the reservoir pressure in stripper well production. Our company has the following concerns to the proposed regulations. It is our opinion that the proposed regulations disproportionately impact small operators. They make it nearly impossible to get a new injection well permitted, forcing small operators to shut in production or transport to disposal facilities. We do transport to a number of facilities on those wells where we produce small amounts of water, but should we need to step out from those areas in Washington County and Logan County, it will be not cost effective. The staff's most recent version suggests that the director will not exempt any UIC aquifer if they have less than 3,000 milligrams per liter, irregardless of the criteria under 802B. The TDS concentration of the produced water from many of our wells, particularly those in Washington County, is typically below 3,000 milligrams per liter, which means these formations at this point would never be exempt UIC aquifers, though they do meet the criteria under 802B, and I think that should be exemplified in that rule. Regardless of the daily injection rate, proposed Rule 803G6 requires seismicity evaluation within 12 miles of the proposed injection well. There's little evidence and little, if any, technical basis for this number. It is very much stepping out and being overly safe, but there needs to be a defined criteria for that. This cost will make it really expensive for the small operator and will limit his opportunities. The one-size-fits-all approach is not appropriate, and the Commission should consider having various permit application criteria and exemptions. Whether the criteria is based on the anticipated injection rate, depth, the aquifer to be exempted, or whether the well is repurposed well or a new well for enhanced recovery or commercial disposal well, all of these have different scales of technical, economic, and risk factors. The criteria for approval of an injection well is not clear at this time. The proposed Rule 802 sets criteria for seeking designation as an exempt UIC aquifer, but fails to explain the significance of an exempt UIC aquifer for purposes of application. The proposed rule fails to provide any standard criteria for an applicant to demonstrate that the injection operations are protective. Proposed Rule 803 should be revised to address information an applicant can submit to demonstrate that criteria under the proposed Rule 801 will be met. Currently, the rules are vague and do not clearly set forth the parameters that an operator can comply with in order to do business in Colorado. In summary, our industry represents a vertically integrated ecosystem ranging from single well operators to the majors. For this system to remain healthy and resilient, it would be advantageous that this full spectrum of operations and economies be maintained. By inspiring rather than distressing the current infrastructure, the Commission will be able to work with industry and more effectively meet the needs and concerns of citizens of Colorado. I believe it is important that the rules be tailored to address this diversity, helping to meet the criteria of Senate Bill 181 and allowing for appropriate local control as appropriate. Lastly, our small injection wells have proven to protect groundwater resources and are an effective method to manage our produced water. I appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. Do we have questions for this panel? Great. Thank you again for appearing with us and providing your testimony. We will move to our next panel. Ms. Larson, so it looks like our next panel is the industry group, is that right?
That is correct, and they are scheduled for 50 minutes. We did have a break scheduled before that presentation begins. If you'd like, we can take that break and then proceed with that panel.
That sounds good to me. We'll go ahead and go a little early with our break. Let's see, it's almost 2:20, so let's return at 2:35. Does that work? All right, thank you. Back, commissioners, and welcome back to our 108 participants in the Colorado Oil and Gas Conservation Mission Change Rule 800 Series rulemaking. Ms. Larson, if I could call on you, I think you may have a slight adjustment in presenters.
Yes, I do, Mr. Chair. Sorry for the background noise. The affiliated local government is ready to present, and they would present now, and then we would call on industry to go after their presentation.
Very good. Then let's line up the affiliated local government presenters, and we will look forward to their presentation, and then we'll go to industry after that. Good afternoon.
Terrific. Great. Good afternoon, Commissioners, Director Murphy. Elizabeth Pranos here on behalf of the City of Aurora, as well as the Affiliated Local Government Coalition. We have one witness today who's from the City of Aurora. I just wanted to, before he provides his testimony, provide some testimony on the issue that Commissioner Putnam raised earlier today, as well as the issue that Matt Sura and his clients raised. So both the Affiliated Local Government Coalition and the City of Aurora share the concern expressed earlier today by Matt Sura and his clients regarding the review process applicable when an operator wishes to convert an existing production well to an injection well. Injection wells are not the same as production wells, and the surface impacts of the two may be quite different. In particular, as Mr. Sura mentioned, injection wells can be accompanied by significant truck traffic hauling the produced water to and from the production site, to the injection site. Thus, it is appropriate to require the operator to submit a transportation plan, which is a plan that's required as part of a Form 2A at a minimum. Second, we share Commissioner Putnam's concern with air emissions at injection wells, as these can also differ from air emissions at production wells. And so because of the quantity and the quality of surface impacts associated with an injection well, as opposed to a production well, we believe operators should be required to submit a Form 2A rather than just a Form 2 when they're converting an existing production well to an injection well. Or at a minimum, an operator should be required to submit a Form 2B documenting cumulative impacts to air quality associated with the application, as well as a transportation plan. We also believe that an application should be subject to an automatic hearing, as is the case when an operator submits a Form 2A, rather than only subject to a hearing if interested persons petition for a hearing and are granted a hearing by the Commission. This is both to recognize the fact that parties must devote resources to the filing of a petition with the Commission for a hearing, and in recognition of the fact that such parties run the risk that the Commission will deny the petition. We believe the additional surface impacts associated with converting production wells to injection wells warrants consideration at a hearing without placing a burden on interested parties to request the hearing and demonstrate the need for such a hearing. And now I'm going to turn it over to Joshua Godwin with the City of Aurora.
Thank you. Can everyone hear me okay?
We can.
Okay, great. Hello, my name is Joshua Godwin. I am employed by the City of Aurora as a geohydrologist for Aurora Water. A little background, at over 170 square miles, the City of Aurora is one of the largest holders of groundwater within Colorado, as well as the largest holder of groundwater rights in the Denver Basin aquifers. As Aurora's geohydrologist, I work hard to effectively manage and protect the aquifers and city assets. I am involved with the planning and development of groundwater projects within and outside the City of Aurora, as well as leading Aurora's hydrogeologic investigations and developing the city's aquifer storage and recovery program. I would like to discuss the notice requirements for Form 33. The city suggests additional notice requirements to accompany a Form 33 injection well permit application in order to ensure that owners and operators of existing or planned dams and reservoirs that could be adversely impacted by faults or fractures induced by oil and gas, induced by underground injection wells, receive notice of the application and have the opportunity to request a hearing on the injection well permit application. Specifically, we suggest that owners and operators of existing or planned dams and reservoirs receive notice of a Form 33. Proposed Rule 803G6 requires the Form 31 include a seismic evaluation of the geological and geophysical evaluation of known transmissive sealing faults or shear zones within 12 miles of the injection well. Proposed Rule 803G6 thus recognizes that impacts from seismic activity can occur 12 miles away from an injection well. Seismic activity can harm dams and reservoirs. Thus, Aurora requests that owners of dams and reservoirs within 12 miles of an injection well receive notice of a proposed injection well. The ALGC, Conservation Colorado, Western Colorado Alliance, Grand Valley Citizens Alliance, and Battlement Concerned Citizens are all in agreement with this proposal. Because staff is proposing a 12-mile radius for seismic evaluation, it is only logical that notice to owners and operators of dams and reservoirs be tied to the same radius. If staff chooses to reduce or enlarge the fault radius, we expect the notice radius to be similarly reduced or enlarged. PDC and Occidental take issue with our proposal to notify owners of dams and reservoirs within the 12-mile radius because, quote unquote, without scientific basis to justify the 12-mile seismic area review, these additional changes are not warranted. Let me be honest, this misses our point entirely, which is that whatever distance staff lands on for the final rule, the notice requirement should mirror it. Moreover, expanding this notice requirement will not be a large cost for oil and gas operators. We understand that the city will receive notice of an oil and gas development permit for an injection well if the well is located within the city or within 2,640 feet of the city. However, these notice requirements are not sufficient to protect city's assets in the event of an application to drill an injection well further than 2,640 feet from the city limits, particularly when the City of Aurora, like many communities, has a stake in dams and reservoirs many miles outside of the city limits. And then in order to ensure that the city is aware of proposed injection wells beyond that 2,640 foot radius from its limits, but within the area in which seismic activity could adversely impact the city's existing or planned dams and reservoirs, we respectfully request the addition of our proposed notice requirement in Rule 803. One final note, we appreciate the changes staff has made to Rule 803F3 and 803G14 regarding measurements of injection wells. In 803F3, we appreciate that staff has based the initial permitting of disposal wells for an injection volume based on a 1/4 mile radius measurement from the surface location for proposed vertical wells or the complete portion of the well bore in the injection zone in drifted directional or horizontal disposal wells. In 803G14, we appreciate that staff has similarly included a notification radius based off of a the completed portion of the wellbore, projected to the surface in plan view in the injection zone in drifted, directional, or horizontal wells. These rules reflect the fact that injection wells are not always drilled vertically. This concludes my testimony for today. I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have on the topics I've covered.
Thank you very much for both of your testimony today. Do commissioners have questions for this panel? All right, seeing no questions, we again appreciate your client's contributions, Ms. Parnos, and thank you both for being here. We will Zoom you away, and I believe we're bringing in the industry panel at this point. Ms. Ryan, I see you are unmuted. Are you going to lead the charge here?
Yes, I shall. One moment, please.
Let's make sure you get all your witnesses lined up, and then we'll get you started.
All right. Good afternoon, commissioners. My name is Julia Ryan, and I'm with Brownstein Hyatt Farber Schreck here today on behalf of the Colorado Oil and Gas Association and its industry group member companies. Next slide, please. I would like to begin by briefly acknowledging that the September 25th Statement of Basis and Purpose added several statements to its background section on local government regulatory interaction. The new language sets forth staff's position that commission rules are the floor under SB 181, and that any local regulations that differ must be more protective or stricter, whatever that means. This is the same staff position you have heard about in the other emission change rulemaking docket, and as in that docket, COGA disagrees with staff's legal interpretation of the Act, and in particular, Section 131. However, I won't repeat arguments on this issue today, but just wanted to note for purposes of this rulemaking that the Commission's floor-ceiling distinction is largely inapplicable to this series because the 800 series rules primarily regulate downhole issues. As Commission staff acknowledges, local governments lack authority to regulate downhole issues entirely. Next slide, please. COGA's first requested change involves the UIC Aquifer exemption criteria. As you heard this morning, the Commission regulates Class 2 injection wells and exempts aquifers for that purpose pursuant to authority delegated to it from the EPA under the Safe Water Drinking Act. The Commission has made several edits to the 800 series rules throughout this rulemaking to ensure that the Commission's rules conform to the federal regulations, which modifications COGA supports. But one of the federal bases upon which an aquifer may be exempt is not recognized by the Commission staff's draft, despite the basis existing in current Rule 324B. What is missing is that federal law pursuant to 40 CFR Section 146 4B2 explicitly provides that a basis to exempt an aquifer is when the aquifer is situated at a depth or location which makes recovery of water for drinking water purposes economically or technologically impractical. As it stands today, the record is unclear as to why the Commission is rejecting the federal standard and its past practice of implementing it. To COGA's knowledge, there have not been issues with this exemption in the past, and the Water Quality Control Division, for its part, considers both contamination as well as the depth and location of water in determining its use classifications. Additionally, staff's draft rules appropriately recognize that aquifers may be subject to an exemption where they are so contaminated that it would be economically or technologically impractical to render the water fit for agricultural or domestic use. COGA doesn't understand why an aquifer that is just as impractical to be used because of its depth or unique geology should not receive the same regulatory consideration as a contaminated aquifer. In this context, the two types of aquifers are the functional equivalent in terms of their viability to serve as a future water source. Whether an aquifer can't serve as a water source because of its contamination level or because of its depth or geology shouldn't matter. COGA does not believe it is either reasonable or necessary to protect water that is not used now and will not be used in the future because it is located at a depth or location such that recovery is economically or technologically impractical. COGA believes it is appropriate to follow federal law and allow an applicant to apply to exempt the aquifer. Recognizing Colorado's commitment to protecting water for agricultural purposes, COGA does believe that the federal exemption could be expanded. So specifically, COGA requests that the Commission add new rules 802B2C and 802B3C as shown in the slide to apply and expand the federal standard of being situated at a depth or location that makes recovery of the water economically or technologically impractical for either drinking water or agricultural use, a basis upon which to apply to exempt an aquifer. Next slide, please. During your last deliberations on September 28th, you gave a preliminary vote to approve Rule 301B in the form presented on this slide. That rule used to read similarly to how proposed 803E still reads. Specifically, former iterations of Rule 301B purported to allow denial of an oil and gas development plan when either the Commission or the Director believe the oil and gas development plan does not minimize adverse impacts to public health, safety, welfare, the environment, wildlife resources, or would fail to protect against adverse environmental impacts on any air, water, soil, or biological resource resulting from oil and gas operations. COGA requests that the Commission adopt a conforming change to Rule 803E as shown on this slide to make it clear that the relevant criteria for all permits is whether the Act and the Commission's rules are satisfied. Making this change will also harmonize Rule 803E with the 200 through 600 series mission change draft statement of basis and purpose, discussing the administrative appeal of the denial of Form 31 and 33s that you heard about earlier this morning. Next slide, please. Draft Rule 802D provides that public hearings on aquifer exemption applications will be held automatically upon timely request. COGA questions the reasonableness and necessity of automatically holding commission hearings under 802D as drafted. It seems inefficient to hold a hearing for no other reason than one was requested, particularly as a rule does not require the requesting party to be an affected person or otherwise to explain why the hearing is warranted. As both the SBP and the rule recognize, the criteria by which an application is judged is going to be the same whether or not a hearing is held. It's whether the criteria of 802B is satisfied. COGA is concerned that having a hearing as a matter of course, simply because someone requested one, may lead to expansive hearings that consider issues beyond the relevant criteria. COGA acknowledges that the Commission staff is not using an affected person standard in this particular rule because the applicable federal regulation that the Commission is following here allows any interested person to request a public hearing. However, there is nothing in federal law requiring that a hearing be held simply because it was requested. For greater efficiency and to ensure that the evaluation of aquifer exemption applications remains focused on the relevant criteria, COGA requests that the Commission modify this rule to provide that written requests for public hearings must explicitly explain why they believe the exemption criteria aren't satisfied, or to at a minimum identify a plausible issue with the sufficiency of the applicant's exemption criteria. Even though as full-time commissioners, you will have more capacity than the previous commission, COGA recognizes your time is not limitless. Next slide, please. COGA appreciates the clarification in the draft statement of basis and purpose regarding Rule 803B and its interplay with the permitting procedures in the 300 series rules. COGA particularly appreciates the statement of basis and purposes clarifying statement that operators need only to submit a Form 2A for any surface disturbance that meets the requirements of Rule 304A. COGA believes further language changes in the rule itself would be helpful to make this concept more clear. In this slide, COGA has proposed language for this purpose that tracks the language included in your draft statement of basis and purpose. This concludes my presentation, and thank you very much for your time.
Mr. Chairman, is it okay if I proceed?
Yes, Mr. Martin, please. I was looking to see who was next.
It is only I, and I will be brief. I'm Jim Martin this afternoon representing API Colorado, and I would be remiss if I didn't start out by thanking the staff for their continued hard work in refining the proposed rules and noting that Julie Murphy, the Director Murphy, is still returning our telephone calls. I'm not sure I would if I were in her place. I also wanted to thank the commissioners for their patience in hearing from the parties in this rulemaking. I have a couple of brief comments, and then we'd like to reserve the balance of our time for closing. First off, I think I would like to thank the staff for removing references to pore space ownership from the 800 series and for the clarification in the statement of basis and purpose. From our view, that issue would have raised some difficult legal and policy issues that would have been extraneous to the core issues raised by the 800 series. So again, we want to thank the staff for making that proposed change. Second, and I know that you might be tired of hearing this, especially since Ms. Ryan has already touched upon this, but we want to reiterate that the criteria for denying an application for a Class 2 UIC well found at 803E differ markedly from the criteria set out in Rule 301B for permit application denials. We have two thoughts in that perspective. First, it seems as if having different standards will just cause confusion. It might be great for lawyers down the road, but having a single standard would be advantageous to all of the stakeholders. But second, the standard at 803E, and Ms. Ryan pointed this out, is so all-encompassing as to be no standard at all. So API Colorado reiterates its concerns, which we've raised in our briefs, about the use of a standard that is in effect provides no discernible standard, either for the guidance of an operator or for any of the other stakeholders who are interested in the work of the commission. Moving on, we'd also like to thank staff for providing greater clarification in the 800 series rules of the requirements that apply to disposal wells as opposed to those that apply to enhanced oil recovery wells. That clarification is useful and very much appreciated. Moving on yet again, I want to address proposed Rule 803G6, uppercase A. We endorse the testimony of Mr. Wordinski of Occidental Petroleum, whom you hear from shortly, today or tomorrow morning. As noted in our briefs, API believes the commission should have impaneled a technical task force to review the available evidence before deciding to require a geological and geophysical evaluation of known transmissive or sealing faults or shear zones within 12 miles of an injection well. We're not objecting to the evaluation, but to the basis of that 12-mile radius. That said, we look forward to seeing the guidance that we anticipate the commission will issue on this subject and hope that it will provide some clearer guidance and clearer direction for operators who have to comply with this rule. In this respect, we suggest the proposed rule should have distinguished between injection wells and enhanced oil recovery wells. Enhanced oil recovery wells are designed for pressure maintenance and hydrocarbon sweep. The risk of seismic activity from pressure changes in an enhanced oil recovery well is very low compared to the kind of pressure changes that might be observed in a disposal well. Finally, API Colorado has a recommendation for the statement of basis and purpose, and we recognize that the staff has labored tirelessly to finalize that statement of basis and purpose. It runs a lot of pages, But we note that in a number of instances, the statement of basis and purpose refers to, and I quote, disposal wells, a term that's undefined. It's unclear from the context whether the statement of basis and purpose is consistently referring to commercial disposal wells, a term that is defined, or to class 2 UIC wells, another term that's defined, or some dedicated injection wells used for the disposal of some other category of dedicated injection wells used for disposal of produced water. We would appreciate some greater clarity around that subject. We recognize, as I said, the enormous work that's gone into the draft statement of basis and purpose. I don't think this suggested change would require a tremendous amount of time from the staff, but it would provide some greater clarity on what it is the staff is referring to. And with that, Mr. Chair, Commissioners, I'll complete my statement, reserve the balance of our time, and happy to take questions.
Thank you, Mr. Martin and Ms. Ryan, for your presentation. I guess I can start. Mr. Martin, with the edits to this pore space issue, from your client's perspective, is that issue no longer an issue?
We're comfortable with where the proposed rules, the rules proposed by staff lie at this moment, yes.
That's actually a better answer than my question, because obviously we haven't acted upon the staff draft, but I appreciate the clarification that you're comfortable with where the staff draft is on the pore space issue.
That's correct.
Ms. Ryan, could I ask you a question then? You had a slide that you went through pretty quick about this issue around currently the draft does not use a 2A for a conversion from a well to an injection well. And we've heard a lot of testimony from others that we should use a Form 2A. And I think you had a slight difference on the theme, and I wanted to give you a chance to sort of fully amplify on that point. And I don't know if you want to go back to your slide or not, but if you could just sort of explain where your client is with regard to the use or non-use of a 2A for a conversion.
Sure. Maybe Mr. Coolidge can get that slide up. So the statement that I added into the slide actually is in staff's statement of basis and purpose. And the idea is not that a Form 2A would not be required in all instances of a new injection well. It would be under the limited circumstance where you have a well pad with a valid Form 2A, meaning that staff has already evaluated things like the traffic plan and other considerations relevant to surface impacts. If one of the wells approved on the pad and contemplated by the approved Form 2A is proposed to be converted to injection, and the surface of the pad is not enlarged, or there aren't otherwise any dramatic changes, I mean anything really that would trigger 304B, then operators believe it's appropriate to let that Form 2A stand and just have the new Form 2. This is more efficient, and impacts have already been evaluated, and also it helps incentivize operators to use conversion for new UIC wells instead of drilling new holes completely. And so I think by making it a little bit more streamlined for operators to convert wells, you'll see less impacts to public health, safety, and welfare, because you're going to be using these existing pads.
Thank you for that clarification. I believe that was the extent of my questions. Do we have other questions for this panel from commissioners? Commissioner Messner.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for the presentation. So I'm going to follow up a little bit on what Chairman Robbins, I think, had indicated, and what we've heard from a number of different parties regarding some desire to see injection wells being treated more similarly, which I'm pretty sure is not a word, to actual production wells, as far as how they're being reviewed, how they're cited, so on and so forth. I think I heard Mr. Martin, and I'm just trying to clarify here, so tell me if I'm wrong, indicate that at least from a denial standpoint, that there was interest in seeing more similarities between the language in the 300 series for production wells applied to injection wells in order to have more consistency between the 300 series and the 800 series in these particular situations. I think I heard from Ms. Ryan, or at least the previous slide indicated that there may be some more clarity around the necessity for a 2A versus a 2 and trying to create some consistency there. But would it be fair to say that there is some interest in trying to have more harmony between how an injection well is being reviewed from a land use perspective and a production well is being reviewed from a land use perspective, understanding that the downhole stuff is very different, and so they're going to have different review processes. But does there need to be more of a shift to have similar review processes between these two things, in your opinion?
Mr. Martin?
Well, Mr. Chairman, or Mr. Chair, and Commissioner Messner, my comment was limited to the issue that API Colorado and others have raised throughout this rulemaking and the preceding rulemaking, which is that the standard for approval or denial of an application of any kind ought to provide some clear warning to all of the parties, whether it's the operator or a local government, about what could lead, the criteria, the standards that could lead to approval or denial of a permit. And I think that what the staff has done with 303E, or 301B rather, 303E, I apologize, ought to be a template for reviewing permit applications for both approval or denial. I didn't touch on the more specific issue you mentioned, and I'll defer to Ms. Ryan on that question.
Ms. Ryan?
Thank you. My understanding is that the two processes actually aren't that different, because if a brand new UIC well is applied for, it would require its own Form 2A. So it would receive the same surface impact review as any other Form 2A. My comments were limited to when you have an instance where you have a well pad, so it's been reviewed, it has a valid Form 2A, and then you want to convert one of the existing producing wells into an injection well. The idea that you can use that existing Form 2A makes sense, and there's efficiencies there because the surface impacts have already been evaluated.
No, and I appreciate that. And I think that, as I'm looking at, trying to make things, one of the terms that gets utilized in some other series is a substantial change. And I think some of the language that you're proposing could be similar to that particular term. Would you have an opposition to utilizing that term, substantial change, in an instance where an existing production well was being turned into, an existing production well was being turned into an injection well? If there was no substantial change, then perhaps it would need a 2. If there was a substantial change, then perhaps it would need a 2A. Does that language, are you comfortable with that language? Should that language be proposed?
I can't say at this exact moment if that language would be necessarily acceptable to industry, but I think significant can be challenging because it can be subjective and it's a little bit in the eye of the beholder. That's why the reference is actually back to the specific criteria of the 300 series rules. And so, for example, is pad size being expanded? Do you have a new access road? Things like that. And I think most people would generally agree that those are substantial changes, and that's why they're codified explicitly in the rules. That provides operators with more clarity in trying to determine, is this appropriate for a new Form 2A, or may the existing Form 2A stand?
Okay, thank you.
Other commissioners with questions? Sorry. Difficulty unmuting myself. Commissioner McGowan.
Sorry, I feel like I'm going to be beating a dead horse here. But Ms. Ryan, if an existing well is going to be converted to an injection well, I'm trying to imagine where there wouldn't be some sort of substantial change. For example, truck traffic coming to drop produced water off, for example. And so I'm wondering if there's an openness to some sort of a modified form, maybe not starting all over again with a 2A, but some sort of modified form that acknowledges that some of the substantial work has been done, like the construction and the drilling, et cetera, but also acknowledging that converting it to an injection well is going to have some sort of impact or change in the way that that well used to be used or was being used when it was completed. Does that make sense what I'm asking?
Ms. Ryan.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. I think staff has the ability to request further information that may shed light on whether the 304B criteria is satisfied such that a new Form 2A is triggered. But my understanding is that oftentimes when you convert a well from a producing well into an injection well, traffic impacts and things like that will be about the same or often less as a producing well. But I think the commission can look at each well on a case-by-case well or well pad just on a case-by-case basis to see if the new Form 2A makes sense, and to the extent some further documentation or further authorization is necessary. I appreciate and agree with you about it's not necessarily getting a new Form 2A from scratch. It should be a streamlined procedure to only focus on whatever it is that is new.
Thank you for that. Other questions for this panel from commissioners? All right. Thank you both for your testimony, for the summaries today, for the written testimony that we've read. We appreciate all of your contributions. And Ms. Ryan, if you could get your PowerPoint over to Ms. Larson, that would be helpful as well. And with that, I believe we are moving to our next panel.
Thank you, commissioners.
Yes, Mr. Chair, this is Ms. Larson. We can proceed with Kinder Morgan. They are ready to present.
Great. Let's bring in Kinder Morgan.
Good afternoon. Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Okay, let me go ahead and share my screen. Okay. Okay, good afternoon, Commissioner. Sorry for the delay there. My name is Ana Gutierrez with Hogan Levels, and I'm here today on behalf of Kinder Morgan CO2 Company. I only have 2 short minutes, so I will keep this brief. I first just want to thank staff for addressing stakeholder comments in the 800 series. As Mr. Martin noted, important changes were incorporated, and the majority of which Kinder Morgan CO2 can support. Regulatory compliance is extremely important to Kinder Morgan CO2. So in my brief testimony, we're really just seeking guidance from staff on what constitutes non-produced water as opposed to produced water, so we can be sure we understand when to file a Form 14A for non-produced water versus a Form 26 for produced water. So in the September rule, staff responded to our comments requesting clarification on this issue, and they included some examples of some additional examples of what is considered non-produced water at Rule 808. I think the issue is that the examples provided create a bit of confusion for us, and they seem to overlap with what is normally considered produced water. I heard Mr. Andrews say in his presentation this morning that the examples that they provided at 808 derive from the fact that any non-produced water must be class 2 waste. I agree with this, and this makes sense, but the same is true for produced water. In order for any fluids to go down a class 2 UIC well, whether it's produced water or non-produced water, that has to be a class 2 waste. The examples of non-produced water that staff provided in the September version, it essentially copies the definition of a class 2 UIC well almost in its entirety, and by doing so, we include in that section those fluids that are in fact produced water. So for clarity in reporting, we're proposing a minor edit to Rule 808 to avoid this overlap and to distinguish Form 26 reporting versus Form 14A reporting. And that concludes my testimony, and I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you for your testimony. Commissioners, do we have questions? All right, seeing none, we will thank you again for your presentation and the input from your client. And we will zoom you away. And I believe that we're going to take up Occidental Petroleum Company and PDC at this point. Is that right, Ms. Larson?
That is correct.
I see we've got Mr. Neslin joining us.
Yes, commissioners. Are you ready? Is Mr. Wordinski on the line?
Yes, he's being
Just
zoomed
getting on
in
board.
right now.
Okay. Mr. Wordinski, are you ready?
As long as folks can hear me.
Okay, very good. I'll get started. Good afternoon, I'm Dave Neslin. I'm here representing Occidental and PDC. We generally support the staff's proposed amendments to the 800 series rules, as well as the points that API and KOGA made a few minutes ago. We would add our thanks to those of other parties, to the staff, to Director Murphy, for all of their hard work, particularly in this most recent draft that addresses many concerns. Like Mr. Martin, we thank the staff for omitting the references to pore space in draft rule 803G3. As explained in our pre-hearing statement and response, the ownership of pore space is a complicated legal issue, which has not yet been resolved by the Colorado legislature or the courts. Accordingly, it would be both premature and inappropriate for this agency to adopt rules at this time governing this subject. In answer to Chairman Robbins' question, the current draft satisfies our concerns on this issue, and we thank the staff for addressing it and eliminating that issue. Now I'd like to introduce Mike Wordinski of Occidental, who'll briefly address two other issues regarding the 800 series.
Commissioners, thank you very much. My name is Mike Wordinski. I am a petroleum engineer working for Occidental Petroleum's regulatory department. I have worked for 20 years in the oil and gas industry. I am a registered professional engineer in the state of Colorado. Recently, I led Colorado industry's subject matter experts on wellbore integrity through the rulemaking for the 200, 300, and 600 series that culminated in June. It was a collaborative process with all stakeholders. I am here today to give testimony on the seismicity evaluation radius required in Rule 803G6. After reviewing the September 25th draft of the Statement of Basis and Purpose for the 800 series and the pre-hearing statements by other parties, Oxy accepts the 12-mile seismicity evaluation radius, given the explanation of the methodology for conducting the review described in the Statement of Basis and Purpose. The SBP makes clear that, quote, operators need not create or gather new data or conduct seismic studies. In preparation of these exhibits, operators are instructed to rely on the data from the USGS for historic and potential seismic activity in the form of the USGS's earthquake catalog and seismic hazard map, both of which are updated continually. We trust that the forthcoming guidance indicated in the SBP instructing operators on how to prepare this exhibit will further demonstrate that an evaluation of this method will not be more burdensome for a 12-mile radius than for a 6-mile radius. I would also like to give testimony on 803 F1. The first part of this rule states the operator shall perform seismic monitoring if the permitted injection rate exceeds 10,000 barrels per day. This rule is not worded to account for a threshold that would apply to other types of Class 2 UIC wells. For example, enhanced oil recovery, where a fluid other than water will be injected, or for a fluid that will be withdrawn. We are in communication with Commission staff and look forward to the ability to ensure, either through red lines or guidance, that this rule is worded appropriately and is applicable for all types of injection operations. We hope that this can be done in a timely fashion for your deliberations. I thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, commissioners. That concludes our testimony. We'd like to reserve any remaining time. We'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Mr. Wordinski, then on behalf of Oxy, the staff draft as written with the clarifications in the statement of basis and purpose, I'd ask sort of the similar question, but you are good with that issue, provided that the staff draft rule and statement of basis and purpose remain as drafted?
Yes, sir, we do.
Commissioner Putnam.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Neslin and Mr. Wordinski. Did have a question just to follow up on your last comment, Mr. Wordinski, about the threshold of 10,000 barrels for fluids other than water, materials other than water. Does that include things like carbon dioxide that could be used for EOR? And could you explain a little bit more why that would suggest a different threshold than the 10,000 barrels of water?
Yes, Chairman Putnam, thank you so much for asking. It was evident through all of the reference material, as well as folks that testified this morning, that it is, those references refer to wastewater of 10,000 barrels a day or more, or those wells that are in clusters, or where that wastewater accumulates over time. So for operators that deal with EOR projects that are injecting compressible media that, for example, as you mentioned, CO2, or as Diana Byrne mentioned this morning, methane or hydrocarbon gas in the form of methane, that fluid behaves very differently and is not akin to wastewater. And so we would want the rule to reflect something that if the intent of staff was to target wastewater 10,000 barrel a day threshold, that is worded more appropriately.
Thank you.
Other questions? Okay, great. Thank you both for your presentation and for your written presentations, which we've all read, and for your involvement in the rulemaking. It's nice to see in certain areas some getting to yes, and so we appreciate that. Appreciate that on behalf of Oxy, Mr. Wordinski, for the great work you did on the wellbore integrity. That was much appreciated as well. Very good. Ms. Larson, we are well into Wednesday, October 7th testimony. Do we have others that would be able to testify today to see? I would try to get through as much as we can today.
We do. I've checked with representatives for the Small Operators Society and with TEP Rocky Mountain. They are both prepared to present this afternoon. And I'm waiting to hear back from a few other parties, and I will keep you apprised as to their responses, but for now we can move on to Small Operators Society and then TEP.
I think that would be great. If we can plug on. I think it would also be beneficial for commissioners in terms of getting to a point where we could do deliberations maybe even earlier. We're working with some scheduling issues, so let's keep at it. Small Operator Society, you're up. Good afternoon, Mr. Moore. We see you. Are you leading here?
Good afternoon. My name is Jess.
Mr. Moore, you have very sketchy sound. It's cutting in and out.
If about now, is this better?
Not really. You sound like a bad AM radio station.
Oh no.
Okay, that's better. I don't know what you did, but
yeah, I apologize. I think I'm in a situation where I have a wife, kids all doing Zoom at the same time, so I may be straining our system.
And Mr. Moore, is sometimes if
Can you hear me okay now?
I was just going to say, Mr. Moore's.
Mr. Moore, try turning off your video. That might make a difference.
Is that better?
That is better.
Thank you so much. I apologize. Like I said, I think I have a wife and several kids who are all Zooming at the same time, and it's causing some problems. Do we also have Jessica Donahue on as well?
Yes, we do.
Okay, thank you very much. And I'm going to share my screen. And Ms. Larson, can I confirm that we have 12 minutes for our presentation?
That is correct. You do have 12 minutes.
Okay. And can everybody see my screen okay?
We can.
Okay. Thank you, Chairman Robbins. Thank you, Commissioners, Director Murphy. It's good to be with you again. I'm Jason Moore on behalf of the Small Operator Society. We also have Jessica Donahue, who's going to do the presentation today. I'll just be manning the PowerPoint. I want to thank you, echo the other comments. We want to particularly thank COGCC staff for all of the hard work put into the 800 series testimony. We only have a few additional issues we'd like to discuss today. I'd also like to say that we concur largely with the comments made earlier by COGA and API Colorado. And with that, I will turn it over to Jessica Donahue.
Hello again, Commissioners. My name is Jessica Donahue. I am here today on behalf of the Small Operator Society to provide testimony regarding the 800 series rules. I want to be clear and emphasize that I'll only be discussing Class 2 wells today, which are operator-controlled injection wells for their own operations. Underground injection control wells, or UICs, are a critical aspect of oil and gas operations. UICs are essential to conduct efficient and safe operations for many operators throughout the state. Having a UIC well can allow operators to have a reliable disposal source while minimizing truck traffic, which in turn limits noise, dust, and waste. A UIC also works to control emissions and reintroduces water to the aquifers. Without a UIC, wastewater would have to be hauled, in most cases, a great distance to a reputable, approved disposal site. For instance, on the West Slope and in Northeast Colorado, waste may have to be transported across state lines to find the closest appropriate site. Fluids that are injected into an underground disposal well do not cause a public water system to violate drinking water standards or otherwise adversely affect public health. The EPA UIC program has created a fact sheet that provides basic information and data about injection wells and how the program protects underground sources of drinking water and public health. I would first like to address the permitting requirements when converting an existing production well to an underground injection control well. There are generally two situations for establishing a UIC well. First would be a new well designated to be a UIC. Second would be a conversion of an existing production well. If you're permitting a brand new well, SOS agrees that the well should undergo the Form 2A and Form 2 process. However, we do not believe it is appropriate to undergo the Form 2A or Form 2 process when converting an existing production well to a UIC. As a compliance specialist and over the course of my career, I've permitted several conversions of existing gas wells to UIC. Permitting a conversion is a unique process. The multitude of forms required are significant. A UIC well permit requires a Form 33, a Form 31, and several Form 26s, which provide a thorough regulatory examination of the well as a suitable UIC candidate. Additionally, the well is required to undergo a mechanical integrity test. Let me explain the process for you. The Form 31 is the Underground Injection Formation Permit application. This form collects information regarding the formation to be injected into, such as porosity, permeability, frac gradient, and estimated injection rates. The Form 33 is the Injection Well Permit application. This form collects information regarding the well bore information. It regurgitates downhole data from the Form 5 and 5A that are already on file for the existing well. The currently proposed Rule 803B contemplates that UIC applications could require submission of a Form 2A and a Form 2. We believe the rule requires more clarity on what the regulatory requirements are for converted UIC wells. Some parties have expressed in their submitted statements that a 2A and a 2 should always be submitted with every UIC candidate. When an operator chooses to convert an existing production well to a UIC well, no redevelopment nor increase of surface disturbance of the well pad occurs. Therefore, there is no reason to require operators to return to the beginning of the siting process and file a Form 2A. Commission staff appears to agree, noting in the draft SBAP that operators need not submit a Form 2A application to convert a production well into an injection well if the production well was contemplated and approved as part of an earlier Form 2A application. We agree, but we also think a Form 2A should not be required when converting an existing production well that was authorized prior to the formal 2A process being implemented.
Ms. Donahue, hold on just a sec. We're going to stop the time.
I don't know what happened.
I think Mr. Moore's got to mute himself. Mr. Moore's got to mute himself.
Mr. Moore, could you mute yourself? Maybe that would.
Mr. Moore, could you mute yourself?
Is that better? Okay. All right. In addition, in cases where the operator is converting an existing well to a UIC well, there's no reason to require the operators to file a Form 2 because the other forms required for the UIC wells provide more than sufficient information for Commission staff to evaluate the proposed conversion from a technical standpoint. So when an operator chooses to convert an existing production well to a UIC, the existing well will already have a Form 2A approved by the COGCC depending on the well's original permitting date. It will definitely have had a Form 2 in order to have been drilled in the first place. And it will have a Form 5 and a 5A once it was completed. The UIC process adds in the Form 31 to discuss the formation's capability, as well as a Form 33 intent to show how well the wellbore is configured. Once you've done any work to prepare the well for injection, you are then required to submit the Form 33 subsequent. In these well conversion instances, it makes no sense to require an operator to revisit the entire 300 series permitting process, including the submittal of the 2A and 2 for an existing well at an existing oil and gas location where little is done to the surface or the wellbore other than to remove equipment and generally reduce the overall surface footprint. Rarely is there an increase in impacts. Operators will often even install a produced water system so that truck traffic will actually be decreased since it can now be piped to the injection well. If we take a moment to look at the well sites we have pictured here, there are 3 different types. In the upper right-hand corner, you have a producing natural gas well. In the center is a producing oil well, and in the upper left-hand side is the injection well. We just wanted to give you some examples of what you can see the different equipment might be on site and how the injection well has the smaller footprint, less equipment. SOS's members believe there is no apparent environmental or compliance purpose to have to submit a new Form 2 other than creating additional regulatory burden unnecessarily to convert an existing well. This could easily be done by submitting a sundry Form 4 documenting the change of use. Without changing any perforations, depths, or downhole information, an operator could begin injecting once they have their 31 and 33 approved. In proposed Rule 803B, it seems that COGCC would like a new Form 2 for even this type of conversion when there are no changes to target formations occurring. This form should not be required as the wellbore is not changing. The footprint of the injection well is often the same or less than what it was as a production well. The current Rule 3250 and proposed Rule 803M both establish a processing timeframe under which applications will expire if not approved within 6 months of submittal. There is a potential for a 90-day extension that can be granted. The UIC applications, in my experience, have taken much longer than the 6 months, usually at least a year, if not up to 18 months. The process for careful consideration by staff to go through an application is time-consuming, in addition to the public notices and the letters and the public comment periods. Requiring a Form 2A or Form 2 for a conversion will further delay the permitting process. By doing so, operators will have to dispose of produced water by trucking it to an approved disposal facility, thereby increasing their truck traffic while they await their approvals. While it is a thorough process, it can be incredibly arduous, which slows the management of wastes and beneficial uses of the existing wellbore. At the end of the day, converting a production well to a UIC well has several benefits, including the beneficial use of the existing well that's no longer productive, fewer truck trips, and a smaller facility footprint. For this reason, we believe that the Form 2A or a Form 2 should not be required when converting an existing well to a UIC. Next, we would like to talk about Rule 803G6, Seismicity Evaluation. Proposed Rule 803G6A requires operators to conduct a geological and geophysical evaluation within 12 miles of the proposed UIC. In the SBAP, COGCC acknowledges that the science supports a radius of 6.2 miles, but still proposed the 12-mile radius out of the abundance of caution. While we all appreciate that Colorado does not need to follow what other states do, we would like to bring to the Commission's attention that Texas only requires a 5.65-mile radius. California, Ohio, and Oklahoma, states with far more reason to be concerned about their induced seismic activity, do not even have a prescribed radius and determine an area concerned with their operators when they submit the application. On this radius map, you can see 5.65-mile radius equals 100 square miles. For perspective, that is equivalent to a distance from Colfax and Kipling across Denver to Colfax and Yosemite, or from the I-25 and 76 interchange down to Santa Fe and Hampton. A 12-mile radius equals 450 square miles. That's the same distance as from Heritage Square over to Colfax and Tower, or from Chatfield Reservoir up to Boondocks. For a state that the USGS shows has a low to minimal threshold for induced seismicity potential, analyzing 450 square miles with every application is neither necessary nor reasonable. Setting a threshold of 100 square miles with the potential for more where necessary in extraordinary circumstances is a palatable solution for all operators in the state. And my last topic today is the traffic light protocol that was newly proposed in the September 25th draft of Rule 803F1. There's no definition of the traffic light protocol. There are no guidelines or thresholds to understand what the TLP will actually entail in practice codified in the SBAP or the rules. In the September 25th update of the draft SBAP, while staff does acknowledge that setting a statewide threshold for the proposed TLP is not appropriate, operators would appreciate more clarity on what staff envisions this to look like. Mr. Andrews gave us a great example during his presentation this morning, but without that example being integrated into the SBAP, there's no reassurance to operators that the thresholds that Mr. Andrews displayed would be the expectation for any TLP proposed in the future. So to wrap up my testimony today, SOS would like to see the reference to an approved 2A removed from the rule and replaced with language saying approved location, since some UIC candidate wells were drilled prior to the formal 2A process. SOS asks that COGCC not require Form 2 for UIC conversion. Please remove the 12-mile requirement and establish a radius no greater than 6 miles for seismicity evaluation unless otherwise warranted. And SOS would also like to ask staff to provide more clarification and codify the guidance on the traffic light protocol. Thank you for your time today, and I'll turn it back to Jason.
Mr. Moore, did you have concluding thoughts?
No, I was just going to say that concludes our testimony. We'd like to reserve any remaining time for closing, and we're happy to answer any questions.
Great, thank you. And Ms. Donahue, if you could get the PowerPoint slide to Ms. Larson, that would be helpful for deliberation. Commissioners, do we have questions for this panel? Commissioner Messner.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for the testimony. Ms. Donahue, I wonder, did you have an opportunity to hear the previous panelists, particularly, I believe it's Mr. Wordinski, who is the engineer from Occidental?
Yes, we did listen to the previous testimony.
Yeah, and he testified that after understanding what tools were going to be required in order to be able to evaluate the seismic activity within that 12 miles, that he didn't find a big difference between 6 and 12 miles. But you're indicating that it's incredibly burdensome, that difference between 6 and 12 miles. So I wonder if you would comment on that.
Ms. Donahue.
Thank you, Chairman. Commissioner Mester, that's an interesting question. With all due respect to the previous panelists, they are a larger corporation. We, Small Operator Society, represents individuals that are 3-person companies. So the exponentially change from a 6-mile radius to a 12-mile radius is much more burdensome for small operators to evaluate. Jason, do you have any other thoughts on that?
Yes, and Commissioner Messner, thank you for that question. I do appreciate that staff clarified that operators would not have to conduct independent seismicity evaluations and could rely on. But I think Ms. Donahue is correct. Operators, there's cost, there's the resources, and these a significant. So and also in reading the draft statement of basis and reviewing the materials, like that agrees that the relevant distance to be concerned about induced seismicity in Colorado is 6 miles, and they doubled that out of an abundance of caution of what we heard earlier, just to be safe. And we would reiterate that even keeping it at 6 miles, if something was identified when mapping at 6 miles that required some additional mapping to fully evaluate, I believe mission staff would have the ability to request that. And so I guess there's a question in my mind. If you find something at 11.5 miles, what happens then if the evidence in the record largely supports that induced seismicity is an issue only at around 6 miles? So I do think that there is a cost and resource issue for operators, and then there's also a question about whether the science supports the need to go up to 12 miles.
All right, thank you.
Other questions from commissioners for this panel? All right, seeing none, I believe that we will move to TEP Rocky Mountain LLC, followed by Weld Citizens as our two final panelists this afternoon. We probably need to do some talking amongst ourselves about what tomorrow looks like. And Ms. Larson will wait and do that after we get these last two panels.
Yes, and Mr. Chair, I know TEP can present this afternoon. Mr. Jewell, however, is not yet in the meeting. So Mr. Jewell, if you are in the meeting and could raise your hand, we will find you. Otherwise, it may be prudent to take a 10-minute break or so, and then return to finish up with TEP and Weld Citizens. Oh, there's Mr. Jewell. So we'll bring him in, and then I know Weld Citizens is available to speak at exactly 4 o'clock. So we may need to take a brief break until 4. So.
Okay.
Thank you, Mimi. Sorry about that. I was indeed listening. Probably had a different moniker up there. Thank you, Commissioners. Michael Jewell again on behalf of Terra Energy Partners and TEP Rocky Mountain LLC. Thank you for indulging me for just a 1-minute drill here. Our pre-hearing statement was very heavy on a request for better definitions and increased clarity. Your staff listened, your staff delivered. So thank you, Mimi, Julie, and staff for that collaboration and consideration. Our second request was about operator guidance, so please consider ourselves enjoined to API statements there on the same and not to belabor that issue. And lastly, regarding forms 2A and 2 for a conversion from a well to a UIC, at least in Terra's experience, we are always less intrusive, we require less equipment, we're piping water in, and all of our UICs enjoy surface owner support and they give financial benefit as well. In most cases. So even in the off chance that such conversion would imply more service disturbance, we agree with industry about the interfacing between rules 803B and rule 304A. So bottom line, we want to preserve your expertise and your time with staff when it comes to issues like this. So we think a Form 2A is going to be a waste of that time, and we think other options are available, as Commissioner McGowan had mentioned, maybe a streamlined filing form or even a sundry. With that, thank you very much for your time, and I'll entertain any questions if you have.
Thank you. Do we have questions? All right, then. We will let you go. Appreciate your being with us and your perspective. I think at this point, we are required to take a break until 4 because Weld, Air, and Water are not ready until 4 o'clock. So is that right, Ms. Larson? Just making sure.
That is correct.
Right. Okay. Then why don't we break until 4 o'clock? We're starting to gather again. It's 4 o'clock. We're waiting on a couple of commissioners left. I went out back and snagged a pear during my break off my tree, and it's tasty. Wish I had many more that I could bring to you guys. Still waiting on a commissioner or two. And Ms. Larson, Weld, Air, and Water is next. If you wanted to go ahead and find their counsel.
Ms. Matsumoto has been put in as a panelist.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. Ms. Larson, I wonder if you see Casey Morris as a participant. She will actually be giving the presentation for us today.
I do. We will put Ms. Morris in.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Ms. Larson. I will just share my screen really quickly.
Okay, great. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Casey Morris, and I am a student attorney with the University of Denver Student Law Office. And I represent Weld Air and Water, Wall of Women, and Margie and Lowell Lewis, collectively the Weld Citizens. The Weld Citizens are residents of Weld County and have been impacted by some of Colorado's most controversial residential oil and gas developments, including Triple Creek, which was the state's first permitted LUMA facility, and the operation at Bella Romero Academy. The Weld Citizens care deeply about their community, and they hope to prevent others from experiencing the harms that they have suffered due to oil and gas development. In order to prevent those harms in the future, the Weld Citizens advocate for strong state oversight and robust public participation to protect citizens when their local governments fail to do so. With respect to the 800 series rules, our comments today will focus on public notice, public hearing requests, local governments, and aquifer protections. First, we ask that the Commission amend the rules to further promote notice around injection well applications and installations. Specifically, the Weld Citizens request 2 changes surrounding notice. First, we ask that the Commission amend Rule 802B to include a sign-up sheet on the COGCC website for individuals and entities to opt in to receive direct notifications when an application has been filed that requires a UIC aquifer exemption. Second, we ask that the COGCC amend Rule 803G14 to require notice for building unit owners, residents, and tenants, both residential and commercial, within 1/2 mile of the proposed well location, as well as emergency responders within 1/2 mile of the proposed well location, and finally, other relevant state agencies. The Weld Citizens also ask that the Commission amend the rules to allow any person who may be adversely affected or aggrieved by an application for an injection well to request a local public hearing before the Commission. Specifically, we ask that Rule 803K be amended to remove its limiting language. The draft rule currently only allows those who have received notice through Rule 803G to request a local public hearing. The ability to request a hearing should not be limited to those notified pursuant to 803G because that draft rule, as currently written, does not require notice for individuals who don't own the land on which they reside, which creates an equity issue. By carrying that exclusion over to public hearing requests, the rules perpetuate inequity. As such, the rule should not view surface and mineral owners as the only individuals worthy of requesting local public hearings, and the language of 803K should focus on the existence of a potential impact to the person rather than the notice that they received. Next, the Weld Citizens ask that the Commission include language in Rule 801 that ensures the Commission will not approve a permit for an injection well over the objection of the relevant local government. While we do believe strongly that the Commission should provide oversight when a local government is not adequately protecting public health, safety, and welfare, the environment, and wildlife resources, the Commission should not intervene when a local government is taking precautionary steps to protect those interests by objecting to an injection well permit. Finally, the Weld Citizens ask that the Commission maintain the language in draft rules 801 and 802 as they relate to underground sources of water. Specifically, we ask that the Commission preserve draft rule 801C's prohibition of injection well approvals for areas where the injection area is separated from an underground source of drinking water by a formation with known faults or fractures. Additionally, we ask that the Commission preserve draft rule 802A's language and decline to adopt amendments recommended by some parties that would allow injection well approvals if aquifers are at depths or locations that would make recovery of the water economically or technologically impractical today. We know that Colorado will experience water shortages in the future, so to allow fresh water to be permanently contaminated simply because we don't currently have the funds or technology to access it due to its location or depth would be irresponsible and frankly contrary to COGCC's mandate to protect public health and the environment. That concludes the Weld Citizens statements with regard to the 800 series draft rules, and I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you for that presentation. If you could get the slides to Ms. Larson, that would be helpful. Do commissioners have questions of this panel? Well, I don't see any questions. I just have a comment. Great work for a student lawyer. You've got a good career ahead of you. It's always good to get precise and specific suggestions with backup behind it, and that's what you did. So this former lawyer, now commissioner chair, appreciates your presentation. You guys have been great in your presentations throughout, so thank you for being involved and providing perspective for Weld citizens.
Thank you. Yeah, we really appreciate your consideration.
Great. Okay, Ms. Larson, I believe that we're done with this panel, and I think at this point we're turning it back to Commission for discussion of next steps. Is that right?
That is correct.
Okay, commissioners. So at this point, we are well into the end of Tuesday, October 7th, which is great because it's still just, or Wednesday, October 7th, it's still just Tuesday, October 6th. We have two more panels tomorrow. That is the Western and Rural Local Government Coalition. And Ms. Larson, was there one more?
There is the Wellington Operating Company.
Oh, right. Okay. It's not highlighted on the agenda, so I missed it. Okay, so those two will go first thing in the morning. The agenda does not have on it, so it then moves directly to commissioner deliberations, but that's not actually accurate because certain parties have reserved time for closing statements. So we would start with the two remaining stakeholder presentations, and then we would move into closing statements. And then following that, we would move into commissioner deliberation tomorrow. I would suggest to us, we've got a commissioner or two that has some inability to be with us starting at about 11:30 tomorrow. So I would like to make sure if we get done in time that we can at least initiate our deliberation and give Commissioner McGowan, who's not going to be available in the afternoon, a chance to bring her thoughts to play first tomorrow during deliberations. I also wonder if it would be okay with everybody if we move up the starting time to say 8:30 as opposed to 9. That would buy us another 30 minutes so that we can try to get through the last two plus closings and then get into deliberation. And then I guess my third sort of thought is if folks could, we're going to end early this afternoon, maybe take some time and go over your notes so that we're able to, sort of move into commissioner deliberation without taking an hour off to sort of collect our thoughts. Then I think we could take advantage of schedules and still hold a hearty hearing in the morning and get through what we need to get through. What do folks think about that? And when I say folks, that includes Director Murphy and Ms. Larson and our attorneys, as well as the rest of the commissioners. All right, I'm seeing no nodding of heads back and forth. So Commissioner Gonzalez.
Oh, no, nothing like that. I was just, I'm comfortable with what's planned and suggested. I'm curious if we want to discuss beyond 11:30 tomorrow and what the following day, Thursday and Friday, might look like with this amended schedule.
My thought on that, and I would defer to our smarter staff members, is it might make sense for us to, if we're not done, and I don't know that we'll be done, but it might make sense to go ahead and finish up deliberation amongst ourselves, even if we've missed Ms. McGowan, but then allow Commissioner McGowan to listen into those deliberations tomorrow evening, and perhaps she could provide some additional perspective to Director Murphy, having listened to the rest of the deliberations. And I suggest all that because I do want to give staff a period of time to be able to take the direction and then come back to us with another, proposal that is consistent with the direction that we give. But we also are kind of a day ahead of ourselves, and I think we could go the entirely other option, which is break at 11:30 and then come back on Thursday morning and finalize deliberations. but that also doesn't give staff as much time to do the red lines that they do so good with. So that's my perspective of the options that are before us. Other commissioners with thoughts? Director Murphy, if you wanted to weigh in. Commissioner Messner.
So I'm trying to make sure that I understand what the proposal is here. So what we've got is going in the morning, we've got a couple of parties that are going to do presentations, and then we would go directly into, well, would we go into closings then, or would we go into deliberations? We'd go into closings.
Yep, we've got probably, we're thinking probably 45 minutes to an hour of closing statements.
Okay. And then we go into deliberations.
Yep.
And we're going to highlight some topics and suggestions and deliberate and provide something to staff, I assume. And then at that point, staff would have to develop a red line, which the parties would then have to review and would have their 3 minutes to provide comment on that at some point. And then we would continue additional deliberations amongst commissioners until we got to a point that we were comfortable moving forward. And so I guess I'm just trying to figure out, how do we create enough time, A, for staff to be able to take the direction that we provide them tomorrow and provide the red line, and then how do we create enough time for parties to be able to absorb the red line and prepare closing, or not closing, well, responses to the red line, and then we would continue deliberating from there. So I guess I'm trying to figure out what those chunks of time need to look like, both for staff time and then for party.
Director Murphy.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Commissioner, for the question. You know, right now staff has been working under the assumption that we'll kind of have somewhere between like 4-ish working hours or so to turn around a red line. And in my estimation, we've resolved a lot of issues in this rulemaking. It's pretty technical. We have a really focused group of staff members who are on board to work through it. And so I think it kind of depends on, you know, of course, what you all want and what your vision is for what those red lines look like. If the changes are to kind of refine, improve upon staff's draft based on what you've heard, I think that's a reasonable amount of time to turn it around. If there were, you know, some glaring error or some gigantic thing we needed to rethink, yeah, we would need more time, but that would be true whether, you know, we tried to get this all done tomorrow morning. Kind of under either scenario, the schedule we're operating under right now, or the slightly modified one that the chair has laid out. And I think that kind of would, if I thought that the questions that you were asking and the changes you were going for would require a more substantial or more substantive time, I would ask you all for it. But, you know, we are here to get this done. And again, we have a focus group of folks. I think we have a lot of agreement. And so I hope, I mean, right now the schedule we're talking about would actually give staff more time to work on that feedback, which is great for us. And then, which hopefully would also give us more time to get it out to parties and them to digest it. So I think being ahead of schedule is overall a good thing. And assuming the parties are ready to go tomorrow at 8:30, staff will be as well.
So with that, Director Murphy, if we follow this line of thinking and we get into deliberation with us providing you and your team direction on these rules, tomorrow's Wednesday, you know, we'd likely be done early afternoon, I would think. And then, as I mentioned, Commissioner McGowan could listen to the latter part, if there is a latter part, and provide you direct information that's allowable, and we've done that in the past. You could start work on Wednesday afternoon and maybe Thursday morning. And then maybe, and again, making this up as we go, but maybe releasing a red line Thursday noonish, and then parties' second 3-minute closing Friday morning, followed by deliberations on Friday. Making it up as we go, but Commissioner Nanjapa.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, just one bit of clarification. I mean, I have some notes from today that I could provide, a quick list of a handful of issues, this evening, if that would help to get kind of the issues lined out, and if other commissioners could do the same. And then obviously we have a couple more parties to hear from, and closing statements. And so then we may just add, that way we're just adding to kind of a running list at that point. If that would be helpful, I think that would be at least easy enough for me to do if other commissioners agree.
I can do that too. I think folks are all nodding up and down, so we may hit your inbox. Commissioner Messner.
I'm just thinking aloud here, so bear with me. But so if we deliberate tomorrow, I mean, here are other two parties. Deliberate tomorrow. Assume we're done. I mean, I'm going to assume, particularly if we're going to provide some information tonight, that we're probably done with staff direction by lunchtime to 1 p.m. Would it be realistic, depending on what that list of direction was, to be able to get a red line out end of day tomorrow or first thing in the morning Thursday, and then be able to start closing comments at noon on Thursday? Or is that compressing things too much?
I think it probably depends upon what we give to staff in terms of the breadth and depth and scope. But we could probably be flexible and nimble. And if we provide to staff, not a wholesale rewrite of anything, but some fine tuning around the edges, then maybe that's doable. And maybe we should just sort of see where we are at 1 o'clock tomorrow in terms of what the breadth and depth looks like.
Sure.
Yeah, Director, I should have just let you answer that.
No, you shouldn't have. It was a great answer. I think that what I would say is that, we know this is a quick, turn. And so if staff is able to get it turned around tomorrow in advance of parties, giving closing statements on Friday morning, we will. If we end up needing until staff presents at 10 o'clock, I think it is, on Thursday morning, we'll take it, but I understand the need to turn it around quickly.
I'm always proud and somewhat fearful when my attorney joins us visually. Mr. Davenport, do you have something to weigh in on this discussion?
I do. Thank you for recognizing me, Mr. Chair. Commissioners, I have an alternative suggestion. I think it may be appropriate for you to wait to hear from all of the parties before you start emailing the staff with the issues that you recognized. Who knows what you'll hear from the rest of the parties, and it may change the issues that you have. So that would be my suggestion, and hopefully it doesn't throw too much of a delay into the proceedings.
Wisely noted. We will at least, I think we will take your advice. I don't think that stops the commissioners from sort of refining their thoughts that they may be, the notes that they may be taking so that they're ready to go. And then, but not delivering anything to Director Murphy is what I think I'm hearing. Is that correct, AG Davenport? Yes. Okay. Okay, I'm also seeing in the chat box, at least one party who's important to this proceeding indicated that parties need more than a couple hours to review the red line. That's a valid point. So let's take that into consideration as we are plotting out Thursday and Friday tomorrow after we identify the breadth and depth of the instruction to Director Murphy. Ms. Larson, were you able to determine if the remaining two parties, or at least one of them, could get started at 8:30 in the morning?
Yes, WRLG is able to present at 8:30 tomorrow morning.
Okay, and that works out great because they've got a 25-minute presentation, so we can then hopefully Wellington operating will be on board by the time they're done. Commissioner Najapa, please.
Sorry, thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a clarification. So per AAG Davenport's recommendation, so we would hear from the remaining parties tomorrow and closing statements, and then we would provide our list of issues to Director Murphy, and then would we adjourn for the day until Thursday? Is that the idea? And then, okay, then deliberate on Thursday. Is that correct?
Well, so yes, the two parties that are still to be done, closing statements, and then move into deliberation in which we, as we've done before, each sort of identify, and Julie's taking notes, the big issues we see, and then try to provide some direction on those issues so that staff has direction on how to go about doing a red line. And we would do that with all five of us until we lose Commissioner McGowan. If we still need to continue, my thought is that we would continue and try to finish that up midday-ish, 1 o'clock-ish, and then Commissioner McGowan can listen to that additional hour or so of deliberation. And it would be appropriate, AAG Davenport, for her to provide additional input to Director Murphy independently tomorrow evening after she's heard the last piece. And then staff would turn the red line as quick as it can while also doing it in a manner that it is good work product. And so that's either, early Thursday afternoon, whatever it may be. And then I think the consistent point here is that we would hear the final closings on the red line Friday morning, which is actually where we were supposed to be anyway. And then we would finish our deliberation on 800 on Friday.
Mr. Chair,
yep.
To answer your question, yes, that would be appropriate for Commissioner McGowan to, if she's not able to provide her thoughts to staff tomorrow morning, to, whenever she has an opportunity, listen to the remainder of the parties or the deliberations and then provide her thoughts via email.
Great, thank you. Commissioner McGowan, we've been talking about you.
I know. I appreciate everyone's flexibility here. My dentist and I are going back and forth about a self-diagnosis I have about my temporary crown, which is very much bothering me. So it just depends on if she can fit me in and whether or not she's going to take care of what I think needs to get taken care of. I might be around tomorrow. She might not see me. So I appreciate everyone's help here. Very much appreciated.
Of course. AAG Davenport or Hearings Officer Larson, I think we have a course of action, but we also just sort of talked through it. It would be helpful to me as a commissioner, and it might be helpful to our 108 participants to get this solidified into some form of a writing and maybe just put on our, I don't think it needs to be in order or anything like that, but just like, here's what next steps look like. I don't know, Commissioner or Hearings Officer Larson?
Yes, Mr. Chair. So I'm happy to update the agenda to reflect the two parties that will be presenting tomorrow morning, and then the transition to party closing statements rebuttal. And then my understanding, based upon our conversation, the conversation you just had, is that for now we will keep Thursday and Friday as is, recognizing that based upon commissioner feedback, those days may change.
Great. Any other thoughts, comments, questions, suggestions that are good for the cause? All right. Thank everyone for participating with us and being involved. At this time, I believe we are looking for a motion to adjourn until Wednesday morning, October 7th at 8:30 a.m.
So moved.
And a second?
Second.
All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Great. We are adjourned. We will see everybody tomorrow morning at 8:30 a.m. Thanks, everybody.